Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Establish the Edge podcast. I'm your host, Mark Dankenbring, and we'll be joined today by the projections crew you know and love, Jack Miller and Ben Gretch. Jack and I are part of the projections team here at Establish the Run, entering our fourth year together, while Gretch is our honored guest throughout this series. You can listen to his podcast, Stealing Bananas with Sean Siegel, as well as find his work at bengretch.substack.com. We'll continue to go division by division through the NFL, breaking down our season-long projections for each team across the league today. And today is episode 6 featuring the AFC North. Gretch, how's it going today?
Good. Yeah, we were pretty stoked at the beginning of the NFC North pod. Really fun division. It's kind of an imbalanced year for the different divisions. Like there's some divisions that are super fun, and this one has the Steelers and the Browns.
Lots of turnover in this division as well. 3 new head coaches. Meanwhile, Bengals running it back. But Jack, you excited to break down the AFC North?
Not as excited as I was yesterday. Echoing what Gretch said, the whiplash going from NFC North to AFC North is pretty fierce. But we're here, and I'm excited to break it down with you guys.
Yeah, always some valuable stuff to unearth here, and we are going to start in Pittsburgh, where the Steelers bring in Mike McCarthy to be the head coach. He reunites with Aaron Rodgers. Pretty interesting setups. We got Mike McCarthy and Todd Monken as new head coaches in this division, and then Jesse Minter, is kind of like a young up and comer as well. So two I guess new but old head coaches here. One being in Pittsburgh with Mike McCarthy, obviously. Had some time in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, and we're starting with the Steelers because at ETR we've been well above market on a lot of Steelers players this offseason. So honestly, wanted to jump right in and kind of discuss our viewpoints and compare with Gretch and just see kind of if we feel confident in that coming out of this show as well. It's a spot we've spent a lot of time on already this postseason. On a team level standpoint here for the Steelers, we're at 60.2 plays. Gretch is at 60.5, and then we're at a 61.1% pass rate. Gretch is at 61%. So essentially in lockstep there on the team level inputs. That 60.2 plays per game right now ranks 30th in the NFL for us. Last year they finished 27th, and then our pass rate 61.1% is the 12th highest projection we have across the league. So Jack, I mentioned we've spent a lot of time kind of on the Steelers so far this offseason. What's your read on Mike McCarthy at the helm here, reunited with Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, so like you said, we've been high on the Steelers all offseason, but I don't think it's because we're particularly aggressive on the actual Steelers inputs. I think it's just the market is really negative on them. We have them for the second fewest real plays per game. That excludes spikes and kneel downs. Last year they had the 5th fewest. We have them 12th in drop back rate. Last year they were 12th in drop back rate, and we have them with the 7th fewest offensive touchdowns per game, which is in line with their expectation in the betting markets right now. So I think that our Steelers inputs are pretty reasonable, and it's good to see Gretch. I mean, we are pretty much right in line. I mean, we're 0.3 plays per game off, 0.1% pass rate off. I assume that's basically as close as we're going to be on any team from a team level standpoint throughout this whole series. But yeah, I want to echo that our pro Steelers stance in our rankings, I think, is more a reflection of where the market is and how negatively the market is viewing them, as opposed to us being actually bullish on the Steelers offense.
Yeah, I think it probably comes back to Aaron Rodgers, entering his age 43 season here. So hard to have, I think, too much confidence on an age 43 quarterback here. Gretch, what's your overarching view on the Steelers and Mike McCarthy in town here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a concerning offense from like a macro perspective when you work through the projections, and I'm sort of looking at it from a bigger like health perspective, or like a bit like things are going to go well for this offense. I think it's easy to see how things could go poorly if Rodgers is injured or is not playing particularly well. They've got a lot of young quarterbacks behind him. Things could go a little bit tricky, but in terms of just like I think a lot was made about last year, Rodgers getting the ball out really quickly and underneath and not throwing downfield. There was like a narrative over multiple weeks about how long it had been since they had completed a 20-yard pass for like a decent stretch of the season, like 6 weeks or something like that, that I was just reminded of when I was going through some of my Stealing Signals writing. But they did eventually complete a 20-yard pass. But at the same time, like, against defenses that are trying to drop back into cover 2 shells and all these things. There were some, I mean, I don't know. I've heard some takes on that are basically like Rodgers is so bad that the offense is like, non-functional. I don't really believe that or agree with that, I guess. The running backs were the big winners in the passing game last year. They both had really good yards per out runs. They both were actually really efficient as receiving weapons. Metcalf had a career low ADOT as well, but some of the catch and run stuff they started doing with him worked okay. Some of the like Rodgers will give you a look and you'll run a quick slant and I'll throw it to you. They seem to have some of that, and Metcalf had some of those kinds of plays. Now they bring in Michael Pittman. They get rid of Arthur Smith, whose offense is always going to be a little bit weird, basically. Thorman did a great breakdown in the in his pace column for the season and noted that Arthur Smith actually kind of likes tempo a little bit, but it didn't really matter for play volume because of Rodgers. And so if you're thinking, McCarthy might be good because he's had some tempo in Dallas, Thorman's also always pointed out that Dak Prescott's really the one that drives the tempo in Dallas. And so you're going to get Rodgers slowing things down. You're going to get a low ADOT. You're going to get some boring stuff. I don't think they're going to be good or anything. I also think like the way he played quarterback last year, like it wasn't great, but it probably was like, I mean, it can be worse. We saw some situations where it was worse around the NFL. Maybe only like 5, but there's a few that it could be worse.
Well, and that's a spot I'm interested to talk through because last year, the Pittsburgh and Rodgers specifically, he targeted running backs at the second highest rate in the NFL. And with the year prior with the Jets, it wasn't quite that high. Like he had more targets to the wide receivers, and now you inject a little bit more wide receiver talent into this team. You trade and then sign an extension with Michael Pittman. You draft Jeremy Bernard in the second round. You also lose Jonnu Smith from that tight end room, and not that Jonnu Smith was a huge volume receiver last year, but you are kind of replacing some tight end targets with some natural wide receiver targets there. And then you bring in Rico Dowdle, whose receiving profile is decent, but not quite like the Kenneth Gainwell level, who has, I think, shown last year that he is one of the better receiving backs in the NFL. And Jaylen Warren will continue that, but I think things will kind of even out a little bit in terms of like the target distribution among positions this year.
Yeah, I mean, certainly potentially. I'm projecting a decent running back target rate again. Rodgers' running backs throughout his career have always been strong. I look at the team high value touches as one stat, which is receptions plus carries inside the 10-yard line, which that side of it is not as relevant here, but they were second in team high value touches last year. There were 6 running backs over 85 targets last year. And then Genty had 73, and then no one else over 60. So it's kind of like the top tier of running back receiving volume. The top 5 and Genty all have really strong ADPs this year. The other guy that was at 85 plus was Gainwell, and obviously he's not with the team anymore. But this is the one spot where the running back targets from last year are not priced in at all. I mean, because behind him, Jaylen Warren still had 45 more targets. Like when we did the Rams, I was talking about how they don't throw the backs a lot. Kyron gets like all of their receiving. He's their lead guy. He had like, I think 51 last year. So like that's the RB1 in one passing game, getting most of their targets. In this passing game, that's the guy getting half as much as his teammate, right? I mean, you had 130 something targets to the running backs in this passing game. It's a huge vacated running back receiving role that I think is not priced in for PPR with Gainwell leaving. Either Warren's got to go up or Dowdle's going to get a bunch. He's got the Mike McCarthy tie in there. I'm actually projecting kind of a lot of targets still to the running backs this year.
For sure. I think we should go to the running backs right away here. Rodgers last year was QBA 28 in fantasy points per game. So not really a single QB league target by any means. Maybe the back end of super flex leagues and best ball, you can obviously use him as a stacking partner, but I do think it's just, more interesting to talk about his pass catchers and the skill group here. And they do bring in Rico Dowdle, sign him to a 2-year, $12.25 million contract. He's got $5 million guaranteed. And then I was comparing that contract to Jaylen Warren. They're essentially the same. Jaylen Warren is also on a 2-year, $12 million deal. He's got $7 million guaranteed. So a couple more million guaranteed, but you do have the aspect that, McCarthy had Rico Dowdle as his starting running back in 2024 in Dallas. And then, his first year in Pittsburgh does sign him. And Jaylen Warren, I think the knock on him prior to last season was he had never really handled much of a rushing workload. And so I was very interested to see where we came in on the inputs here. And we actually kind of have it pretty flipped in terms of rush attempts. On Jalen Warren, we're at 145. Gretch is at 184. And then on Rico Dowdle, we're at 181 and Gretch is at 147. So essentially the inverse there. Gretch did mention, a lot more running back targets here, and he does have that. We're at 54 on Jalen Warren. Gretch is at 62. He's also at 62 on Rico Dowdle, and we're only at 38 targets on Rico Dowdle. So pretty interesting split there, Jack. I think this is kind of a tough one to diagnose again because Jalen Warren, had only topped out at 150 or, hadn't topped 150 carries in his career prior to last season. And then again, Kenneth Gainwell, was just such an elite pass catcher. Like that was kind of his role. And I kind of think this year it could end up being flipped a little bit. So we have more carries for Dowdle and then more targets for Warren. I'm curious how you see this duo breaking down.
Yeah, I think you've got two running backs here who can do things in both facets. I think the decision to bring in Rico Dowdle and why we have Dowdle ahead of Warren in carries, I think the decision to bring in Rico shows that they want him in that role because of the familiarity with McCarthy. They signed him on the very first day that free agency was open. He has 235 carries and essentially 1,075 yards in back-to-back seasons. He was good in Carolina. It was a weird year last year for Dowdle where he had that monster stretch in the middle of the season. His full season numbers are good, 4.6 yards per carry, plus 0.63 rush yards over expectation per attempt. But in the playoff game, they did go back to Chuba Hubbard a little bit more. But I think that in signing Dowdle and clearly prioritizing him because they signed him right away in free agency, I think that to me signals they want him as their lead ball carrier. That's not to say Warren won't get carries. I think that it's going to be a committee as both a runner and a receiver, and they're both going to get chances to do both. But we've seen Warren before in that complementary pass down role. He did that for years with Najee Harris, and I think that in signing Dowdle, they kind of signal they want to go back to Warren in that pass down role. So that's kind of why we have Dowdle ahead at the moment. But I think both are capable backs. If there's an injury to the other one, I think both of them would slide pretty seamlessly into a pretty legit 3-down role.
That's a pretty interesting takeaway. I mean, I definitely don't just reject that. I didn't really know how to approach this. The fact that they brought in Dowdle so quickly, definitely notable to me. One of the things that will play in, especially as we go to wide receiver, is I do think Rodgers dictates a little bit of the skill position usage from the teams that he's quarterbacked the last few years, and obviously has the relationship with McCarthy, and McCarthy would have known that coming in, and I think they hired McCarthy in part because they didn't want to get Rodgers back this year, and all those things kind of tie together. And Rodgers has kind of been clear, he's going to only play for teams where he has some say and some power. I don't know anything about what he might think about Dowdle, but I do think he seemed to enjoy playing with Jalen Warren last year to a degree. And so the fact that Warren has the familiarity there was part of why I was thinking a little bit of the leg, and was the lead rusher last year and an effective rusher. But Dowdle's been an efficient rusher the last few years as well. But one of the things with the McCarthy Dowdle thing that, maybe I'm not seeing as strongly as you guys. He definitely likes Dowdle. He's talked about he's been a part of Dowdle's story. McCarthy was a head coach in Dallas from 2020 to 2024. Dowdle was on that roster from 2020 to 2023 and got nothing, and then finally had the 2024 season. So he was his player for 5 years, and McCarthy finally used him the 5th year. Famously, Dowdle has been really good the last 2 years after being a special teams guy for several years. It's a very abnormal progression. But I don't think I think he knows the system and all of that stuff, but I don't think it holds a ton of water to be Mike McCarthy loves this guy, because he basically took forever to use him in any kind of a real way. So definitely, again, knows the system, brings him in. I think Dowdle's going to play a ton. I think of Jalen Warren as one of the more talented runners in the league. His evasion rates have always been really strong. Dowdle's missed tackles forced per touch are half of Jalen Warren's over the last couple of years, or last year especially. But Dowdle still has relatively similar yards per carry figures. He gets downhill and he still gets stuff done, even though he's not necessarily evading a bunch of tackles. Warren is maybe a little more of a scat back who's evading tackles, but not necessarily doing as. Although Warren's not a small back, but he's not necessarily doing as much as you would love with all that evasion. Well, I don't know. It's just kind of weird because different backs get their different ways. But he has some, like, you go back a couple years with Warren, he had like massive evasion rates back in like 2023, and he did have a 5.2 yards per carry that year. It's been lower the last couple years, 4.2, 4.5, but he's always been an efficient rusher. But Dowdle's been at 4.6 the last 2 years, which is also a good, efficient, rushing number. When McCarthy's talked about him, he said, I love that Dowdle and Warren's play styles emulate each other. He's talked about him as interchangeable 3-down guys. I kind of lean toward, like, Dowdle has been good in the pass protection stuff, and that's sort of where he started getting the role with McCarthy. And Warren wasn't doing as much because of Gainwell last year. I don't know. I think it's a very interesting take that you guys have that it'll kind of flip this year. But I guess I was looking at it more from the perspective of like how Warren was used alongside Rodgers last year, and then maybe Dowdle would do a little more in the receiving side. So I have him for the same amount of targets, but I have Warren for more rushes and sort of the more valuable overall role. You guys have him pretty much dead even in terms of like fantasy points, but
we do,
Dowdle as the lead rusher.
For sure, and that's what I was going to say is I think we like both of these backs in fantasy as targets. In terms of just how we have it distributed right now, we slightly lean Warren in PPR formats, and then Rico in half PPR formats. Again, just kind of how we have the touches distributed there. But I'm not necessarily like married to that split. I do think there could be reports or just more enlightenment on how McCarthy and Rodgers plan to use these backs throughout the season. But I do think both are pretty solid targets. Both on, they should get work on the ground, and they've both shown to be like prolific or at least above average pass catchers as well.
And they're at great prices. I think that's a great way of putting it. I mean, I think it seems pretty likely to me, as long as Rodgers doesn't like get hurt right away early in the year, that one or both of these guys are going to be pretty good values at these ADPs. Especially in PPR, like full PPR. And I'm not trying to downplay the McCarthy Rico thing either. Like, he had a 1,300-yard season, with him just a couple of years ago. Like, there's familiarity there for sure. And I like the way you put it. It really doesn't matter how this splits. I think we like both guys, and we think there's a lot of value here.
For sure. And market is a little bit flipped on us. Jaylen Warren, at least on Underdog, is going around ahead of Rico Dowdle. Meanwhile, we have Rico Dowdle ranked about 5 spots ahead of Jaylen Warren in that half PPR format on Underdog. But then, looking at like FFPC redraft rankings, Jaylen Warren, we have 6 spots ahead, and we're still, above ADP on both guys there. So again, I think both are pretty solid targets. You don't necessarily have to pull our hair out over the exact split between the two. I think they're both probably solid targets at this point in time. And the Steelers offensive line is supposed to be, a solid unit this year as well. I am pretty eager to see where Brandon Thorne ends up ranking them. But
I will say on pass downs specifically, and part of the reason we have Warren a good amount ahead in targets is last year in Carolina, it was mostly always Chuba Hubbard getting the pass downs. And then I'm pretty sure 2 years ago in Dallas, Rico still had a decent target share. He had an 8.2% target share, but I remember Hunter Lepke, the fullback, getting a good amount of the actual like clear 3rd and long situations there. And that's something we've seen Warren get in the past when Najee Harris was on the team. So I was kind of thinking, like you guys have said, in the end, it won't matter all that much because Rodgers throws the running backs a bunch. They're both going to play a bunch. But I was thinking more that Warren would likely get the actual like 3rd and long 2-minute drill stuff. But
that's interesting.
I do think it's worth mentioning Caleb Johnson is still a part of this backfield. He was a 3rd round pick last year, and it might not be, but people are probably out there thinking, that we're in the weeds here. So, but he hardly played at all last year. Was one of like fantasy's biggest busts. I think he was going in like the 7th, 8th round most of draft season last year, and hardly played at all. Seemingly didn't touch the ball. But as a new coaching staff, I think maybe something to keep an eye on. But considering they signed Rico and Warren is a good back, I don't think it really is worth factoring in.
Drafted Eli Heidenreich or however you say it from Navy, right? That does a little bit of do everything, plays some running back, plays some receiver. For me with Caleb, it's like you barely played last year. Now you have some, frankly, probably a little bit of competition for RB3. Like, you're not locked into that role. There's the potential that he grows into something. He did have a day 2, draft capital like type of prospect profile, at least as a rusher. But I go back to the Rodgers thing. He had some drops last year. He made some special teams errors in the Seattle game. They got back into a game and he just didn't feel the kickoff, and Seattle fell on it. think they were down 3, and Seattle had scored and taken the lead, and then got a touchdown on the kickoff and went up 10, and that was just it for that game. And it was like a key point in their season. It was like week 6 or 7 or something.
For sure. And Mike Tomlin pretty much like shadow banned.
And
Caleb
I think
Johnson
Rodgers is still gonna like
on.
not. I mean, Rodgers, you don't ever get out of Rodgers' doghouse. Like Caleb Johnson, good luck, dude. Next year when Rodgers is finally retired.
All right, let's go to the wide receiver room here. DK Metcalf, still the wide receiver 1, in name, I think, but Michael Pittman is traded for a 6th and 7th round pick, and then again sign an extension here with the Steelers. They do draft Jeremy Bernard in the 2nd rounds, and Jeremy Bernard and DK Metcalf have been like the 2 we've been highest above market at this point of the summer. So I was interested to see where we came in on this kind of trio of wide receivers. On DK Metcalf, we're at 102 targets. Gretch is at 109. On Michael Pittman, we're at 100 targets. Gretch is at 114. Then on Jeremy Bernard, we're at 62 targets. Gretch at 43. So quite a bit behind us in that department, which I have to say I don't love off the cuff here, because that's certainly been one of our bigger stands towards the end of best ball drafts, specifically, is being high on Jeremy Bernard. And I think this comes back a little bit to the personnel discussion in Pittsburgh last year. The Steelers were 25th in terms of 11 personnel usage when McCarthy was in Dallas. At least his last 3 seasons in Dallas, they finished 10th, 22nd, and 19th in 11 personnel usage. So a little bit better, one year up at 10th, but mostly kind of like middle of the road there. So I do think 11 personnel usage will tick up a little bit here. Mentioned Jonnu Smith out of the picture as well, and then just kind of investing more in the wide receivers. So, but we still may be high there a little bit. And then one discussion we've also had, Jack, is who to project for more targets, DK Metcalf or Michael Pittman, and Gretch actually comes in a little bit higher on Pittman. So curious, Jack, your thoughts initially on kind of this wide receiver room before we kick it over to Gretch.
Yeah, the DK versus Pittman one is not one that I have a super strong take on from a target standpoint. We have them 0.5% target share ahead. We've been high on DK all offseason. He had a 21.1% target share last year. We're at 19%. We have Pittman at 18.5% right now. I think I'm not super opposed to flipping that 0.5% from Metcalf to Pittman and putting Pittman ahead. I know Silva thinks Pittman will also lead the team in targets. Regardless, we're going to come out high on Metcalf. I think the Jeremy one is more interesting because a lot of our target share projections for rookies is based on draft capital. So we just, and then, some level of adjustment for the level of prospect, for the type of target competition on the team. We do have Pat Fryermuth and Darnell Washington here. They just extended Darnell Washington. So I think despite McCarthy coming in, you're still going to see a lot of 12 personnel here. But by virtue of being a 2nd round pick, we have Jeremy as the very clear wide receiver 3 here over guys like Roman Wilson. And so we have him for a decent target share. We have his ceiling muted relative to other 2nd round rookies because of the team situation that he falls in. But I am curious to hear Gretch's Jeremy Bernard take, because he's a little more in the weeds on the prospect stuff than us. And we are quite high on Jeremy at the moment.
Well, I mean, I think he's an interesting guy. I mean, really good ball in hand guy. Yak evasion stuff is all really nice. The overall production profile is probably just okay. Some of this to me is, again, like Aaron Rodgers, like I'm probably overstating it, but he just doesn't seem to like rookies like at all. There's been a long, I'm thinking back to, I guess, maybe Amari Rodgers just sucked, but like Amari Rodgers in Green Bay, and then there's been other dudes, I don't know, they're not all coming to mind, but it's been a long-term trend for Rodgers. I think Bernard's interesting, but you hit on it as well. It's the 11 personnel versus 12 personnel thing probably for me. I have a couple more targets for the tight ends, decently more on Fryermuth, and then also a couple more on Darnell Washington. Even though they lost Jonnu, I think Washington's basically like a starter for them. McCarthy loves him, has talked him up all offseason, called him a complete wide tight end. But I'm also pretty high on Pat Fryermuth. I don't mean to just jump over the tight ends, but he's had consistently huge catch rates, consistently huge depth-adjusted racers, which I use for my efficiency stuff. But his yards per target have been good as a result. Really good touchdown rates, decent yak even. I mean, he's like a legitimately good tight end. Former round 2 pick, was good in college at Penn State. It just has been in some weird situations. Like Arthur Smith does so much weird stuff the last few years has been weird. The Steelers have not always had great passing games, and then you have Darnell Washington there. But to me, it feels a lot like Freiermuth, Washington, Pittman, Metcalf is the type of four-man, wide receiver and tight end build that you'd really like. And so I'm seeing Freiermuth as sort of the wide receiver 3 in some respects with Washington. You mentioned the O-line. There's mixed opinions on the O-line. I mean, I'm optimistic as well, but I think keeping Darnell Washington on the field is like McCarthy's talked about him as like a 6th O-lineman. Like you don't have that type of tight end anymore. And then, Freiermuth can also block. He's a legit every down like tight end that can do everything. That's always been the scouting report on him, but obviously a very good receiver. And so anyway, I'm seeing a lot of 12. They also talked about a fullback being on the roster and whoever they drafted, Riley Nowakowski. So I'm seeing like those as, potentially not 3 wide receiver formations whenever they get a second running back on maybe do some 2 tight ends, maybe do some 22 personnel, 2 tight ends, 2 running backs. So for me with Bernard, it's just a question of, okay, he's a rookie. How quickly is Rodgers going to be okay with him? How much are they going to actually get into 3 wide receiver sets and get this rookie on the field? I do think he's an intriguing dude. The ball in hand stuff is intriguing. I actually minor note, I have him for 12 rush attempts. You guys have him for 3.9. I think they're going to do some gadget stuff with him and give him, some carries. That's obviously not a big gap, but I think they'll find ways to get him to scheme the ball into his hand, but I basically don't think they're going to use enough of the 11 personnel in the formation. And then he's just not going to get on in 12. It's going to be Metcalf and Pittman. You have 2 veterans.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And you're also higher on the running back targets as well, just, an overall. So I think it's just a spot where we're probably just a little bit higher on the wide receiver 3 and that has flowed to Bernard specifically. But I wouldn't mind, after talking through it, probably docking him a little bit. I will say in terms of the Rodgers not loving rookies, on Bernard, I felt like his prospects or, the stuff I listened to was he was one of the more mature, college prospects and could make that transfer to the NFL a little bit more seamlessly. So maybe that's in my head a little bit too much, but certainly hear you on that. And then in terms of the Metcalf and Pittman, kind of target distribution, I do think even if Metcalf ends up getting fewer targets than Michael Pittman, he's still who I would want in fantasy. Michael Pittman, has a 7.4 yards per target in his career. Meanwhile, Metcalf is at 8.7. That held last year, even though he had his lowest ADOT of his career. That was DK Metcalf. He has lowest ADOT of his career by about 2 yards, but he also had his highest yards after catch per reception. So Gretch, kind of how you alluded to on more of those short slants that allowed him some field to run afterwards. I do feel like they utilized him pretty well there. So last year, Metcalf.
That was an interesting new wrinkle for him. It was a lot more yards after catch per reception than typical for him. And you would think that would not only continue, but it makes sense for a guy with Metcalf's athleticism, right, to do some of that catch and run. And I think that stuff was they were on the same page with it. Some of that was just the glance routes and stuff that Rodgers likes to do. And I think they were very much on the same page. I think it seems legitimately positive for Metcalf. I started with these guys at the same target share. The only reason I went Pittman ahead is that Pittman is a lower ADOT player. Even at Metcalf's reduced ADOT, he was basically wide receiver average. Pittman's always been a below average guy. He operates more in the lower area. You're going to get more targets when your routes are breaking in shorter areas. Rodgers is getting the ball out earlier. I do think Pittman's going to impact some of the lower ADOT stuff, and that's Pittman's profile. He's been a lower ADOT target hog, but I do have his yards per target meaningfully lower, his TD rate meaningfully lower than Metcalf, as you're alluding to. Metcalf had a good year last year, man. 21.3 targets per out run was a 3-year high for him. And you talked about the efficiency sticking, solid 1.83 yards per out run. For a guy that, I felt like it might be kind of a tough situation for him. The routes weren't really there, but if they throw a little more, I think there's room there for Metcalf to have a pretty solid year.
Yeah, and Pittman just doesn't have much juice after the catch either. So I think he's probably fine in PPR leagues, but I'm not necessarily super eager in drafting Michael Pittman in half PPR, especially just with a 43-year-old at quarterback and some overarching concerns at on this offense as a whole. But on Pat Freiermuth last year, he only had 51% route share. In 2024, without Jonnu Smith, that was up at 71%. Darnell Washington was on the team in 2024 as well. Obviously, a bit more season now, but I do think we could see Freiermuth kind of get back up into that 65 to 70% route share, which makes him a very viable, end of draft tight end target. And Gretch, you'll love to hear that we are a full 2 rounds ahead of underdog ADP on Freiermuth. So you're gonna absolutely love drafting him over there.
Oh, yeah.
He's pretty much free. He's going as the tight end 29 right now. So very, very discounted in drafts for sure.
Love that. I think he's one of the best late round tight ends, because you're looking at routes at a certain point, and I think people see Washington and they get concerned. I think this is a great example of the different tight end roles, and the loss of Jonnu, like you said, is actually really big for Freiermuth. Washington is going to do some stuff for sure in the pass game, but he's also like a 6th lineman. I mean, that's sort of, in some ways he frees Freiermuth up, and you get into the 2 tight end stuff. And then, yeah, I mean, how big of I think Freiermuth's biggest concern would be how big of a role Bernard has. So if you're really into the 11 personnel stuff, you think Bernard's going to have a big role. It may be that the tight ends do split a little bit. I think they're both going to be on the field a decent amount together, and Freiermuth's going to run kind of a lot of routes, which is pretty big.
I think the Washington stuff is pretty interesting. Last year, Mark pointed this out when we were doing weekly projections, but Mike Tomlin had some quotes about, I believe it was when the opposing defense ran a 4-3, that was when they wanted Darnell Washington on the field more, and if they were playing a 3-4, they didn't want Darnell Washington on the field more. And as the season went on, that trend kind of went away. I don't know if it's because the defenses were disguising more and it was getting more difficult to predict pre-snap exactly when he'd be needed or not. But early in the season, there were some really stark splits for Darnell Washington in terms of when he'd play a lot of snaps and when he wouldn't. So I'm sure there's like some sort of ball-knowing angle. I think that, as we've talked about, the defenses are getting better at disguising a lot of stuff, which probably renders it a little bit less useful. But he's an interesting player because he pretty much is a 6th offensive lineman. He was on the St. Brown Brothers podcast and said he's like 320 pounds. He's 6'7", 320. So he is like quite literally an offensive lineman out there. And I do think that the dichotomy of him versus Jeremy Bernard snaps are interesting to think through and likely matchup dependent. And Freiermuth is pretty entrenched there as like the actual tight end 1 type role that we're used to seeing.
Right, and that note you just made about Washington's weight, I mean, think about that in the context of Freiermuth, where I think people, again, are concerned about Freiermuth's usage because there's these 2 guys that have a tight end label next to their name, and it's like they're going to use this other guy, but he's 320 pounds. Like, they're going to use him some, but he's not going to run 600 routes. That's just not practical for Darnell Washington. It may cut into Freiermuth a little bit. Freiermuth's a very traditional tight end size. If anything, he's I think a little bit undersized, but like a very solid receiving tight end profile as well. Like I said, like if you go look at his actual like per target stuff, very good. I mean, his catch rate's been over 70% 3 straight years. Last 2 years, 83% and 77%. And it's not one of these like really low ADOTs that some tight ends have. It's a little bit below average, but not bad. But like he's got mitts. They talked about this coming out. He was going to be a red zone threat coming out when he was a day 2 pick. And he's had 3 years with a 7.5% receiving TD rate or higher, 2 that were low. But he's definitely capable of stacking some touchdowns. That depth adjusted racer number I talked about, he's been well above average each of the last 3 years. I think he's just like a legit good tight end.
Yeah, and shout out Penn State. I think Levitan at one point, has dubbed Pat Freiermuth put on this earth to score touchdowns. So hopefully we get a few more of those this season. All right, let's transition over to the Cleveland Browns, who did bring in Todd Monken as their head coach, and he will be the play caller here in Cleveland's. It's a tough team to talk about because in mid-July we pretty much have no idea who the starting quarterback is going to be. Reading through the tea leaves, it sounds like it's going to be a battle throughout training camp between Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders, most likely. They also have Dylan Gabriel in the room, but he was absolutely horrendous last year. I don't think he really has a shot. Then they also drafted Taylon Green this year, who's more of an athletic freak. Seems like more of a pretty raw quarterback in the sense, but could eventually get there and is like an interesting dynasty stash, I think, at this point. But in terms of a team level, it is pretty difficult to talk about without knowing who the quarterback is going to be. And then they also are likely to start 5 new offensive linemen. They drafted 2 wide receivers, in the first 40 picks. So there's a lot of new and interesting things going on in Cleveland, but it is pretty tough to dissect. On a team level for the Browns, we're at 60.4 plays. Gretch is at 60.3. We're at a 62% pass rate, and Gretch is at 61%. So relatively in line there. In terms of the quarterback split, we have Deshaun Watson kind of as the favored quarterback at this point in time. In terms of a passing share, we're at 50% on Deshaun Watson, 40% on Shedeur, and then we sprinkled a little bit on Taylor Green and Dalen Gabriel in the back end there. But I don't know if you guys even want to talk about this quarterback room at this point in time. I mean, the last time we saw Deshaun, it was a historically bad quarterback season. He was at 5.3 yards per attempt in 2024. He's since torn his Achilles twice, and so I don't really know if he has any NFL career left. And then Shedeur Sanders, had a tough season last year, but at least more of like a runway in front of him, I guess. So I don't know, Jack, any thoughts on this quarterback room, or Gretch, if you guys want to hop in here, I'll just kind of open the floor to talk through this Browns quarterback situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's brutal either way. Watson was at 5.3 yards per attempt in 2024, 6.0 throughout his Browns career, and he tore his right Achilles twice since the last time he's taken an NFL snap. Shedeur, 6.6 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns, 10 picks, and nearly a 10% sack rate last year. It sounds like Watson has been good in practice this offseason. I'm obviously very hesitant to buy that, and I think it makes more sense for them to start Shedeur simply because he's younger and they're not going to compete this year. But I guess we'll see what they actually end up doing. But they're implied for the third fewest points per game. Todd Monken has had very different offenses, mostly based on personnel. They were pass happy in Tampa Bay. They were very run heavy, obviously, with Lamar Jackson. We have them for very low in play volume, and then I assume they want to run the ball a lot, but with teams this bad, it's always a question of how much will they actually be able to do that given game script.
I love that I went into this thinking I guess I didn't really think about it too much, but I'd probably project Shedeur Sanders to play more. And I went through the quotes and some of the stuff in the offseason that you guys were alluding to, and I wound up projecting Watson to get 60% of the dropbacks and Sanders 40%. And then I don't have a system where I could project a third quarterback, and I didn't care to. But I love that you guys have it similarly, like Watson leaning a little bit, because I was like, I wonder what they're going to do, and I assumed I had it wrong. But we're actually pretty similar in terms of the split. But yeah, that's the way that I'm kind of reading it as well. One of the things with Monken is he's always kind of liked athletic QBs. He comes over from being in Baltimore most recently, and he's been talking, one of the specific quotes he's been talking about, saying that Watson's athleticism shows up, which is interesting coming off the Achilles. But Watson has always been a really good athlete. Like if you go look at his rushing, even though he's been a horrible passer in Cleveland, he's always had like good yards per carry. When he does scramble, he finds space. Like he has always been good with the ball in his hands. I think people probably assume a little bit that Shedeur Sanders is, because he's the son of Deion Sanders, who famously like ran a 4.2 in Timberlands. Like there's all these like stories about Deion Sanders, who was one of the greatest athletes in the history of the sport. But Shedeur Sanders is actually kind of not a great athlete necessarily, not a huge scrambler, didn't do a lot of that, and it wasn't a lot there in his prospect profile. He actually had a decent yards per carry last year, but he also did it with like a 10% sack rate, as Jack was talking about. Like Watson is a little bit better in that regard. He's taken some sacks for sure, but kind of that combination of like when you're holding the ball, are you evading some sacks? Are you turning it into positive scrambles? At least from what I'm.
Well, and Shedeur, the last 5 starts for Shedeur, he averaged 30 rushing yards per game. He didn't run at all in like the first 2, and then kind of started to scramble a little bit more. I think that was mostly just he realized like the passing game weapons were horrendous. He didn't really have anyone to throw to, and their offensive line was absolutely crumbling at that point in time. So I don't know. After analyzing this, we have Watson ahead. I personally am like rooting for Shedeur to start just to see more of the unknown, and I think it was a really difficult situation last year. Who knows if he'll end up playing any better this year, but man, I do not want to see Deshaun Watson play quarterback in the NFL at all anymore. So I'm personally rooting for Shedeur.
Yeah, I thought he'd be done. The big thing I would say is their passing efficiency. Like Watson's was really bad, but like Shedeur's was pretty poor as well. The passing efficiency was similar. Watson has not had really high interception rates either. Shedeur had some pretty huge interception rates as well, in addition to having Watson has really bad sack rates too. But anyway, I'm very I'm going through the projection. I'm very curious how it works out. I mean, frankly, I'd just like to see Taylor Green. This guy's 6'6", 227, elite jumps. I mean, you're talking about 4.37. Like this is Anthony Richardson. Like
yeah. Well, it's funny because Yeah, at the ETR retreat this year, I always ask Sean Newsham, PSU fans, and Alex Harden, who are like our college football analysts. I ask for like the rookie scouting reports, and I'm asking about some of the Browns guys, and Sean just goes, just draft Taylor Green on every team. And I was like, you mean dynasty team, right? He's like, no, every team. Like if this guy plays, he's going to destroy fantasy. So I do think he is probably a pretty interesting dynasty stash.
It's crazy how good of an athlete this guy is, dude.
Yeah. Yeah, and like the questions about him this offseason have been like, are you going to convert him to tight end or wide receiver? And they're like, no, we're going to keep him at quarterback. So I do think that is, one at least interesting quarterback nugget we can toss out for the Browns here. Let's go to the running back room, though, headlined by Quinshon Judkins, who had, an interesting rookie year, certainly tons of volume. The efficiency was not there, but also had the lowest yards before contact in the NFL last year among qualified running backs. So again, just a pretty rough offensive environment and offensive line there for the Browns. And then he dislocated his ankle and fractured his fibula on December 21st of last season. Recovery seems to be going well. He's already was practicing and the spring mini camp and seemingly looked good there. So in terms of projections, we're at 236 rush attempts on Judkins. Gretch is at 259. We're at 36 targets, and Gretch is at 39 on him. And then on Dylan Sampson, we're at 84 rush attempts. Gretch is at 77. We're at 36 targets on Sampson. Gretch is at 53. So we have the targets even on Judkins and Sampson. Gretch a little bit ahead there, and obviously we have the lion's share of rushing work on Judkins here. So Jack, it's a pretty tough situation once again for Judkins, but he does, set up to see a ton of rushing work this year. What's your read on Judkins in this backfield?
Yeah, Judkins only averaged 3.6 yards per carry, but I think if you try to isolate what he did, it was actually pretty good. He was at 0.3 rush yards over expectation per attempt, 14th out of 48 qualifying running backs in yards after contact per attempt. So I think Judkins himself was pretty good. He didn't play a lot of the pass downs, but he still had a 7.7% seasonal target share, which isn't absolutely terrible. The problem for Judkins is that he's likely to be a two-down back on one of the worst offenses in the league, and an offense that is going to be facing negative game scripts a lot. I believe we have Judkins tied for the highest share of design carries in the league, so we have him dominating carries within his own offense as much as anybody in the league, and we still come in below ADP on him simply because those carries are not super likely to be valuable in this offense. Sampson's a little bit interesting too. He was really inefficient as a runner, but he did get targets. He had a 29% targets per out run, 6.8 yards per target, which is actually pretty good for a running back. And if you factor in the strength of the offense, that's really impressive to have a 6.8 yards per target as a running back on the Browns offense. Last year, the pass down role is vacated. Jerome Ford is gone. So I think Sampson is interesting from a target share perspective. If Judkins were to go down, I think Rocket Sanders could factor in a little bit. We saw that near the end of the year last year. And then going back to Judkins, the big question, he has been practicing since May, but we've seen the fibula injuries impact players the following year before. It sounds like everything is all good on the Judkins front, but it's worth keeping in mind for sure.
Yeah, and on efficiency standpoint, we're at 3.9 yards per carry on Judkins. Gretch a little bit higher at 4.1, but for the most part in lockstep there. I do think, Judkins had a couple games without Dylan Sampson last season. One of those games was played in full. The second game without Sampson is when Judkins got injured, but in that one full game that Judkins had without Dylan Sampson, he ran 55% of the routes, and he had 6 targets in that game before he got hurt. And prior to that game, he had a 27% route share on the season. So it did double without Dylan Sampson. I do think those roles will be pretty distinct. And then you have Todd Monken coming over from Baltimore, who had, kind of Justice Hill in that pass game role. So I do think like it can slot pretty nicely in there. And Sampson was a, pretty solid prospect coming into last year and did have good target numbers. So I think he's an interesting kind of end of draft flyer in PPR leagues. Not a whole lot of interest in half PPR, but Gretch, do you have much interest in Judkins or this backfield for fantasy this year?
Yeah, no, I would just echo what you guys said. I agree on Sampson. Ryan Heath of Fantasy Points had a great stat that a different running back has led the offense in rush attempts per game and targets per game in each of Todd Monken's 7 years as an NFL offensive coordinator, dating all the way to 2016 with the Bucs. I was clicking through some of his time at Georgia, and it was true there too. They had like Zamir White as the lead back, and then they were like throwing to James Cook a little bit out of the backfield more, and Kenny McIntosh. up until I think like the final season, it was the same back had the lead in the run and the pass down stuff, but he kind of sees those running back roles as a little bit distinct. He was with the Browns in 2019 when Chubb was the lead rusher and Kareem Hunt was the pretty clear pass down guy. So we've seen this from him in a variety of different offenses. You mentioned obviously Derrick Henry, Justice Hill the last few years in Baltimore. So that's where I come out with, I'm even light on you guys on the rush attempts for Sampson, but come out with significantly more targets for Sampson relative to a Judkins because of that, and then also just because of the receiving efficiency that Jack mentioned. 1.86 yards per out run, very good as a rookie. He mentioned the targets per out, yards per target. I have different source, slightly different numbers, but same general vibe. Very strong for a running back. Judkins was at about half of that at 1.05 yards per out run. Which isn't, even terrible or anything, but Sampson was really, really solid. And so I do think we're kind of going that direction. And then what Jack said as well, I just had a note that I thought Judkins was probably better than the 3.6 yards per carry he had. He did have, you mentioned some of the yards after contact, some of the rush yards over expected was good. He did have pretty poor evasion numbers. It was kind of disappointed to see that, I guess, when I was digging into some of the advanced stuff. There's a lot of times when he was contacted in the backfield, like when you were watching those games, and then eventually he would kind of hit for one. I don't know enough about rushing efficiency to know what was really the different stuff, but it seemed like when it was well blocked he would get it, but sometimes he wasn't creating anything necessarily on his own. Although it's hard to parse that from the offensive line being really bad, but the offensive line is expected to be pretty poor. Again, I was looking at a few different sources. Some of them have them dead last. Some of them have them in the bottom 5. They have 4 out of 5 new expected starters that were not with the team last year. 3 veteran adds, 2 from free agency, 1 in a trade, and then a 2026 first-round pick at tackle. And so continuity becomes a thing at offensive line. And so that's also, not great when you have 2 quarterbacks that take sacks and then some of the issues with Judkins. This offense, not a lot of reason for optimism. They do have the 4th easiest schedule, so we got that going for us.
For sure. And just insane youth across the board here for the Browns, especially if Shadur starts at quarterback. Almost every one of their skill players is going to be 22 or 23 and under outside of Jerry Jeudy, who's only 27. But, you have Casey Concepcion, Denzel Boston, Quinshot Judkins, and then Harold Fannin, who are all really young. So there's going to be some bumps and bruises along the way. And I just find it a little ironic that Todd Monken gets his first head coaching job at age 60 and is just thrust into an offense full of guys that are 22 years old. It's pretty interesting there. But let's go on to that wide receiver room, because they did invest a decent amount of capital at that position this season. Drafted Casey Concepcion in the first round, and then Denzel Boston high in the second round. Jerry Jeudy returns to this team as well. And then obviously you have Harold Fannin, who was, rookie tight end breakout last year, drafted in the 3rd round and was a young tight end at only 21 years old. So pretty interesting pass catchers to talk through here in terms of target distribution. We have Casey Concepcion leading this wide receiver room at 86 targets. Gretch is at 79. We're at 71 targets on Denzel Boston. Gretch is at 50 there. And then on Jerry Jeudy, we're at 69 targets and Gretch is at 100 targets. So massive discrepancy there. That is also a spot we've gotten kind of bullied down a little bit. Open the offseason a lot higher on Jerry Jeudy. And, there are some questions on what his role will be, again, just kind of given the draft capital invested into the other 2 guys here. But I don't know. It's
hilariously, I still have fewer receiving touchdowns for Jerry Jeudy than you guys, even with 30 more targets.
That is pretty wild. That has been his biggest issue in his career. Only a 2.8% TD rate throughout his career, but he has
17
averaged
touchdowns on 607 targets. This dude's not getting it in the ends. His QBs have always sucked, but whew.
Crazy for sure. And yeah, over 600 targets in 6 seasons. He's averaged over 100 targets a year, and people just do not want this dude at all in fantasy football. He's going as the wide receiver 73 right now on Underdog. So, essentially free back there. But Denzel Boston is the prototypical X receiver. And then last year with the Browns, Jerry Jeudy ran 80% of his routes out wide. He's been 64. He was 64% out wide in Cleveland the prior season, but was a 60% slot guy in Denver. So I do think there is some potential change that could come there. And then Casey Concepcion has drawn some Zay Flower comps, and especially I think with Todd Monken coming over here, that has proliferated a little bit, and Zay Flowers has been 2/3 out wide, 1/3 in the slot. So I think we see Denzel Boston out wide for sure here, and then Concepcion and Judy could potentially be interchangeable out wide and in the slot. But I've been pretty into Concepcion. I think just given, he is one of the more talented wide receiver prospects. So Gretch, I'll toss that to your way a little bit. In fantasy drafts, he's going 45 spots behind Mekhi Lemon at this point in time, and I think has a little bit clearer path to targets. Obviously a much worse offense, but only drafted 4 spots behind Mekhi Lemon. I'm curious if you're excited about Casey Concepcion and his profile at all, or a little bit disappointed in the landing spot and looking more towards, kind of like a dynasty pick more so than a redraft pick for this year.
Well, he has a lot going for him. I mean, he's an early declare, turns 22 in September, so super young. Really good evasion rates, ball in hand stuff. He went to 2 different colleges. They both used him on rushes a good amount. They had him out there on punt returns last year, which we've seen over the years. There's some signal in teams just trying to get the ball in guys' hands in different ways. He didn't test, but I think we can get a pretty good feel that he's got the quickness and the ability with some of the numbers, the ball in hand stuff, the evasion rates. His targets per out run all 3 years of college were really high, at least 24.6%, 88 plus targets all 3 years, 2 years over 100. I mean, it seems like a really good ball in hand guy. He's under 200 pounds, but he's going to be athletic and shifty and all of those things. One of the really interesting things about his fit as it relates back to Shedeur Sanders and what this offense looked like last year, and like one of the reasons I don't want to be in on Jerry Jeudy again. I had a lot of him last year. When I wrote my Field Tippers article earlier this offseason, I mean, I outright was like, this stat I'm about to tell you makes you want to like kind of get back into Jeudy. And I was like, typically that would be due to QB play. And then I'd have to make a case that Judy's longer track record probably makes him the one that you should consider a rebound from, which is not a case I'm going to make. So let's just say they all suck and move on from it. Like, that's the way I ended that article. And we're months later. I did a little bit of a positive Calvin Ridley thing on the AFC South thing. Calvin Ridley's 32. Jerry Jeudy's 27 years old. Has a ton of money on his contract for 2 more years. Every time they've asked about Jerry Jeudy this offseason, the team has told you that they still think of him as a starting wide receiver. They asked after the draft how the wide receiver selections affect Jerry Jeudy. 0 impact on Jerry. He's our bell cow. They've had a bunch of positive stuff about him in the pre-draft and the early offseason about how the offense let him down. The stat that I was alluding to, within this offense last year, the running backs had really high target rates. The tight ends at low ADOTs had high target rates, and then all of the wide receivers were suppressed. The quarterbacks could not get the ball down the field. Jeudy led the wide receivers in targets per out run at 17.4%, which was for him a career low, but it was higher than every other wide receiver on this roster. He had a terrible year. He had a horrible drops issues. He had a lot of effort issues. Again, he's owed a ton of money through 2027 probably on the team, unless they do like a post July 1 cut next year and eat like still some money to do that. And again, still just 27 years old. It's not the same thing as the Ridley thing where he's like 32 and I'm probably out of my mind and they have Carnell Tate and he's a top 5 guy. This is a late first round pick in Concepcion who plays a different role in my mind. He's a ball in hand underneath guy, even though you said that they're going to move these guys around. Jeudy, his ADOT has been more, legitimately vertical. I always kind of think about it in terms of depths. The concern for me would be more about Boston. I really like Boston. I'm a UW alum. He's a bigger dude, praised for his physicality, the catch point. Some people don't like how dependent he is on contested catches. I think he's good. I think he's going to be probably solid. I do think it's probably a tougher role to succeed with poor QB play right away. He had kind of a high ADOT, over 1,100 yards both the past 2 years. I have a hard time seeing him objectively, but he was a later producer in college as well. We like to see early production. A hard time seeing him objectively again because I saw him live. I watch all their games. I went to school there, so I thought he was great, and I think he's probably going to be good. But I've been wrong on a lot of UW players. No UW players are ever good in the NFL, in case you guys are unaware. But Jeudy still ran a ton of routes last year as well. I want to mention he was deemed like a route merchant in 2024. He ran 591 routes again last year. The TD rate's really, really bad. But if you look at him statistically over the course of his career, again, 27-year-old, last year, huge outlier year. His 17.4% targets per out and his 5.8 yards per target, both career lows by a lot. You have the drops and effort issues. You have all that. His previous career yards per out run, 1.65. He was all the way down at 1.02 last year. His catch rate was way lower than career low. His depth-adjusted racer stuff that I look at tends to actually be positive. He tends to be efficient relative to his depth It was very negative last year. Maybe he's just done at 27, but it looks like he was just like out on the season, and they've been saying all offseason he's their dude. So I didn't want to project him to lead the team in targets. They got 2 rookies. I think they're going to play those rookies a lot. I'm still projecting those guys to combine for 130 targets. I think Concepcion's going to have the clearer early role as the first-round pick. He's another one that I gave solid rush attempt volume to as well. I think Boston is going to probably play a good amount, but I have a decent little role. I have a bigger role for Tillman than you guys, and I probably don't like that. I probably just want to give that over to Boston. I just didn't, I had some Tillman, some Isaiah Bond. You guys have more for Bond. I just think they're going to do some rotational stuff, whatever. But to me, Judy, again, as like this veteran, I don't think you just throw, especially when like Sanders is out there at quarterback, you throw all the rookies out there, the second-year tight end and the 2 rookie receivers, and say, hey, second-year quarterback, all you guys go figure it out. Second-year running back. I mean, Judy, that's why they called him the bell cow. He's their veteran. They're paying him a bunch of money. Again, ran 600 routes even when he wasn't even trying last year. They kept running him out there. Different coaching staff, same GM. I don't know. I think he's going to run a lot of routes, dude. I think he's going to play a lot.
And in best ball, Judy is almost a guy I'd be willing to push like all my chips in on if just get at his price. If I felt a little bit better about the quarterback play, and then you do have like the TD rate kind of dragging him down a little bit in that regard. But man, yeah, I mean, you just take the profile as a 27-year-old former first round pick who's averaged 100 targets throughout his career. I think it's kind of hard to be any lower than we are. Like I think we're as low as we can go, and we're still above market there. And
the case I made last year on this show was every quarterback he'd ever played with was terrible. You go back, like he played with Brett Rippon a bunch, and like Russell Wilson in Denver when he was like bad was like one of the better quarterbacks he ever played with. Judy's never played with anyone decent. Not that he, was looking like he was going into last year, but I was making the case last year that maybe because it was like Joe Flacco was going to start. Maybe that's going to be the best QB he's played with for fantasy production. And obviously Judy has a horrible year last year, but my point is the longer track record that I'm saying that last year was an outlier from was with bad quarterback play every year of his career. He's been able to still be a 1.6 or better yards per route run guy. I mean, honestly, he was awful last year. Probably the worst individual football player of the entire season. I watch all the games for every team. It was like one of the worst individual seasons you'll see at any position. So I don't want to draft him, and I have not like clicked his name at all. But I do think objectively, it's probably a good click.
Jack, we're above a market on all 3 wide receivers and Fannin here, and again, it's a little uneasy just kind of given the quarterback play outlook. But we have the QBs here pretty muted. I think we're at like 6.5 yards per attempt on both guys, so quite low. But curious your thoughts on this wide receiver room, if there's any guys that you're eager to take in fantasy this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us being high on everyone versus market, I think it's a spot where the market kind of just decides not to draft certain players on these teams. But when you actually project it out, I mean, you can't project the Browns for like 1 touchdown per game. Like we can project them for among the lowest touchdowns per game, but even when you do that, we kind of end up higher. Whereas some people just decide, oh, they're on the Browns, I'm not going to draft them. We're higher on Garrett Wilson too. We'll get to that eventually. But for this receiver room specifically, I'll say that Boston has been getting really good reviews from Brown's practices all offseason. I think that his lack of production early in the career is somewhat defensible because he was behind Rome, Jalen McMillan, Polk, and Jeremy Bernard as well. So I think that kind of explains part of why he didn't produce for his first years. And then when he did get on the field, he was productive at the same time. He didn't produce when he was playing behind Jalen Polk. So, I mean, take that for what it's worth. But I think that they're talking up getting Concepcion the ball in a bunch of ways. I believe the phrase they used was a bevy of ways. So I think that he's going to get a bunch of design touches. He won the Paul Hornung Award for the most versatile player in college football last year. Gretch alluded to his kick and punt return abilities. I think they're going to try to get the ball in his hands a lot and let him make plays. And that's certainly a better fit for their quarterback room than Denzel Boston trying to win down the field. So I kind of agree with what you guys have said. Maybe a little higher Boston just on the offseason reviews that he's gotten so far. Isaiah Bond has also been talked about really glowingly. That's why we're a little higher. And it sounds like Tillman probably makes the roster, but it's not a lock. So that's why we have Bond ahead. But I mostly think it's going to be these top three. I mean, Bond was at 0.13 targets per route run last year, so I think targets could consolidate around these top three receivers and Fannin quite a bit.
I'll have you guys know that while Jack was talking, I just took half a percentage point of target share off of Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman and moved it to Denzel Boston because, I mean, it's just embarrassing.
What a world. Real life reactions to how great this Browns wide receiver room. But honestly, like when I was looking at this team last night, I was like, man, okay, Concepcion in Boston, I feel like decent prospects. I like those guys. Jeudy, I feel like is just kicked to the curb. But like he's a solid NFL wide receiver. And then you have Harold Fannin. Like, man, if we get some quarterback play with Todd MF and Monken at the helm here, like I think this could be somewhat of an exciting team potentially. But obviously, I'm looking through rose-colored glasses, and it's likely to be another tough season for the Browns. But
I'll rephrase. I said targets could consolidate. I meant snaps could consolidate within the wide receiver room. I don't think this is going to be a super concentrated offense, but I think because of how bad Bond was at earning targets last year, it sounds like Tillman is completely irrelevant. I think you could see wide receiver snaps really condense around the top three to the point that they're really just playing three guys.
Let's go to the tight end room. Harold Fannin, mentioned he had a strong rookie tight end season. Volume-wise, he had 72 catches, 731 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He also had 7 carries for 13 yards and a touchdown. So clearly they were trying to get the ball into Harold Fannin's hands last year. He finished 8th among NFL tight ends in receiving yards, and he had at least a 19% target share in every game from week 6 to 16. So he was eased in routes-wise a little bit with David Njoku there, but really took over down the stretch. And just given how brutal this offense was all around, I think the Fannin season was pretty impressive. They also drafted Joe Royer out of Cincinnati. He also went to Elder High School, which I have a few good friends who went there. So shout out Joe Royer and Elder here. But Fannin is the bell of the ball here. Gretch had a strong rookie season, and is now being drafted as a tight end 7 and has much more target competition this year. So I'm curious if you think there's much of a leap from Fannin this year. We actually haven't projected for the most targets on the team. We're at 102. You're at 110. So it looks like you're in the same boat there. What are your expectations for Harold Fannin going into his sophomore season?
I mean, I think he's a stud. We talked about it last year on the show, but 117 catches his final year at Bowling Green. Didn't lead a conference or all tight ends. It led all of FBS at any position. So did the 1,555 receiving yards. People who pointed out that was at Bowling Green were missing that they played Penn State on the road, and I think it was A&M on the road. And in back-to-back weeks, I believe it was, lost by like 6 and 7. And so they're like in these games, and Harold Fannin was their whole offense in both games. It was like the other team should be trying to stop this guy. He's the one that's like carrying a Bowling Green team to almost upset teams like Penn State in Happy Valley. And then he comes in last year. He's an age 21 rookie. Everyone's worried about it. He's got duck feet and all this stuff. Production is production, man. He led the team in targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns in a bad situation. His 23.9% targets per route run by PFS numbers. It led all tight ends who ran at least 250 routes. He was ahead of McBride and George Kittle. I mean, McBride ran a ton of routes. We talked about that. Fannin ran fewer. But another note is Njoku in this offense had been over 23% 2 years in a row. People a couple years back talked about how he was a Flacco merchant, and Flacco's back, and Njoku's going to catch all these passes. His targets per route when Fannin steps in as a 21-year-old rookie goes from over 23% 2 years in a row to 16.6% last year with Fannin on the roster. Fannin's depth-adjusted yardage was very strong at a low ADOT. His yards per target, not amazing, but if you adjust for that low ADOT, solid 1.68 yards per route run. Not amazing, but again, for a tight end in a terrible situation, leading the whole team in volume, leading the position in targets per route, to still put up, decent efficiency on the back end. His ball and hand stuff looked good. Made guys miss, had some missed tackles forced. This guy's a stud. They asked Todd Monken if he reminded him of any tight ends in his past. Todd Monken was at Georgia, I just mentioned a few minutes ago, and Brock Bowers was there. And Todd Monken didn't hesitate to draw that comparison and say, he just reminds me of Brock Bowers. Just like that dude. Yeah, I mean, Harold Fannin's a legit stud. Like this guy, he's going into his age 22 season. The fact that he just did what he did at age 21 in the offense that he was in and what he had done at Bowling Green that I'm referencing, I mean, it can't get overstated. I don't love the situation again this year, but I don't pass on guys that I think are this good. I try to get exposure to them.
Yeah, and if Shedeur does end up at quarterback, Fannin's numbers were even stronger with him. He had a 28% target per out run and a 24% target share with Shedeur at quarterback. So maybe that connection, could become fruitful once again this year. And we kind of talk about all the potential outcomes of the wide receiver room. I certainly feel the most confident in Fannin kind of repeating his success from his rookie year, given all you laid out there. All right, let's go on to Baltimore. A fun fantasy offense finally here in hour number 2 of the show. They bring in Jesse Minter as the head coach, and then Declan Doyle is over as the offensive coordinator and play caller. He was in Chicago last year under Ben Johnson. Previously was in Denver under Sean Payton, and then was with the Saints under Sean Payton as well. So a Sean Payton and Ben Johnson product here, and Declan Doyle heads to Baltimore. In terms of play level or team level play calling, here we have the Ravens at 61.4 plays. Gretch is at 61.9. We're at a 55.5% pass rate. Gretch is at 54%. So a little bit lower on the pass rate, but our 55.5% pass rate projection is the lowest we have in the NFL. So we're certainly not expecting the Ravens to throw the ball much at all this season. It is the first season for Lamar Jackson without John Harbaugh, though, so it'll be interesting to see kind of how that plays out this season. Jack, curious your thoughts on Declan Doyle coming over, and this is we haven't seen him call plays before. He was the OC last year in Chicago, but Ben Johnson called plays. So rookie play caller here in Baltimore with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. What are you expecting out of Declan Doyle in this Ravens offense?
Yeah, we haven't seen a ton from Declan Doyle, like you said. Hasn't called plays yet, but I think learning from Sean Payton and Ben Johnson is one of the better come-ups you can have. He's only 30 years old, so he's a part of this young, exciting group of coaches that are kind of ascending into the head coach spot now. But in terms of how that actually affects the Ravens team level projection, we're kind of just assuming they're going to be what they have been in recent years from a play volume and pass rate standpoint. I mean, we've seen this offense be hyper successful, running the ball a bunch. It makes sense. They have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry at their disposal. So from a team level projection standpoint, we're kind of just expecting Doyle to maybe add some new tricks, but projection wise, more of the same.
Yeah, and last year they were faltered quite a bit in plays per game. We have them at 29th last season with about 56 real plays per game. This year we're up at 61.4, which is 18th in the league. And my first thought was Doyle, coming from Ben Johnson, the Bears and Lions have run a ton of plays under Ben Johnson, and then similar with Sean Payton in Denver. So I was, a little bit optimistic about the tempo upside. Thorman also mentioned that kind of in his pace article as well, that could potentially be unearthed a little bit. But yeah, in terms of like raw pass attempts, last year the Ravens finished 32nd, and the year prior they were 31st and then 30th and 28th. So, certainly not expecting like a big pass attempt leap here or anything. But Gretch, any overarching thoughts on Declan Doyle here?
I mean, I think I think he's a tricky one. Like I've seen a lot of people reference the Ben Johnson stuff as if he's going to run a Ben Johnson offense. He's, I believe, the youngest OC in the league. He's like 6 months older than Lamar Jackson. He's just turned 30 or is turning 30 this year. I was looking into his background, and I mean, like he started as a student assistant in college, and then immediately out of college. And his dad was like a strength and conditioning coach, but he was hired by Sean Payton's Saints back when like they still had like Michael Thomas having his career year and stuff. So he's had a lot of time at the NFL level, but he spent a lot of time with Payton. He was with the Saints for several years and then moved on to the Broncos before the 1 year under Ben Johnson. I do think both of those teams used a lot of motion, a lot of different personnel, a lot of multiplicity. I'm thinking it's still going to be a pretty run-heavy offense with play action off of that and these different things that you guys are kind of talking through. I was reading Thorman's pace notes as well, and he was kind of saying, there's some potential for some pace, but also like don't get too excited because it's kind of the way that things have been with Lamar. So I mean, I'm not expecting. We both have them relatively low in play volume. I have them a ton in play volume. They do have the 6th easiest strength of schedule. The Vegas win total quite high, I think, based on what people are expecting. These days, there's a lot of juice either way. I think it's set at 11.5, a lot of under juice, and then you can, pay a lot of juice on the over at 10.5. It's basically like 11 if you want to split the difference. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a fascinating year because you also have a really young first-time head coach as the DC in Jesse Minter. There's been some parallels drawn between him and Mike Macdonald. They were position coaches together for 4 years in Baltimore from, I think it was 2017 to 2020. They had different position groups, linebackers and safeties or whatever it was, when they were both very young dudes. And Minter moved on and then now is back as the head coach for the Ravens. I bring up Macdonald. I think he, you go through his first OC. Name's slipping me. The UW guy, Ryan Grubb, and he has like a half decent first year as a coordinator, but he fires him right away and wants to install a different type of offense, or at least this is the way I've read it. That Macdonald had a little bit more of a hand in. Like, this is the offense I think you need to have. You need to have the Shanahan tree offense. They go to Clint Kubiak. They've obviously now lost Clint Kubiak, but stayed with that type of tree with their new OC hire. My point being that I think there's some possibility that Minter has a little bit of a say in based on this hire as well, in where the direction of the offense is going to go and what he was looking for. And to me, looking at Macdonald, it did lean again toward that run-based, play-action-based sort of offense. It's a tough one for me to figure out what we're going to see out of this offense, because I think Lamar Jackson's skill set dictates a lot. And again, with the really young coaches, a lot of optimism from the market. It'll be, and then, I mean, heck, let's talk about Derrick Henry. I mean, he turned 32 in January. Like, just because we've been wrong guessing at an age cliff for years doesn't mean that's not potentially there. But if he's on the field, yeah, it's going to be run-based. If he's not on the field, is Justice Hill going to be a power back? Is Adam Randall, this rookie who just transitioned from wide receiver to running back in his last college year, going to be a power back? Is Rasheen Ali? I think that changes the look of the offense massively, whether Derrick Henry gets through 17 games or not in his age 32 season. And really, he'll be 33 in January of this year. I mean, like, at the end of the regular season. This is a guy that, as durable and great as he's been, is getting up there for sure in running back years.
Yeah, and the pass catcher core is pretty top heavy here with Zay Flowers and but Mark Andrews had a pretty brutal fall off last year, so it's like questions around if he's hit an age cliff at all. And then they draft 2 rookies, Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt this year, so I do think there are some decent questions about this Baltimore offense. I honestly hadn't looked at the win total. The fact that they're priced around 11, I do think does present a lot of optimism here, because there are some decent holes to poke in the approach this year. But let's start with the Lamar of it all. In terms of inputs, we're at 475 pass attempts, Gretch at 482. Pretty similar in terms of completion percentage. We're close to 65%. Gretch is at 66%. But what I really want to hone in and talk about is Lamar's rushing output, because last year that's really what took a dip. He was QB 16 in fantasy points per game last year, had never been below QB 7 since 2021, and it mostly came from the rushing side of things. Last year he only averaged 27 rushing yards per game. Coming into last season, Lamar had averaged 60 rushing yards per game in his career. Just absolutely insane. I honestly didn't realize it was that high. That's absolutely out of control, averaging 60 rushing yards per game for Lamar. And honestly, it came a lot from the designed rush attempts. Last year he had 27 designed rushes according to our SIS data, and only in 13 games. In the previous season he had 98 in 17 games, and the year before that, 2023, he had 84 design rush attempts in 16 games. So last year he had like 2 design rush attempts per game, and in the previous 2 years it was at like 5.5. So it was almost cut in third. Just a massive gap there. So in terms of our rush attempt projection, we're at 122 on Lamar. Gretch is at 115. So Jack, this is a spot I think is pretty impactful and important to get right in terms of projecting Lamar Jackson as a fantasy asset this season. We're currently a little bit above market on him in best ball, have him as the QB2 this year. So what's your read on this Lamar rushing output? Do you think the design attempts will come back this year? He is only 29 years old, so I don't think the age is a huge concern, but what's your level of confidence in Lamar kind of returning to his rushing ways?
Yeah, like you said, it was mostly from a designed run standpoint. His scramble rate was still 8.2%. He didn't have any scrambles in his final 2 appearances of the season on limited dropbacks, but when he came back from the injury, he was still scrambling a decent amount. He had 5 combined scrambles his first 2 weeks back from the hamstring injury. So it was mostly the design stuff, and it was pretty stark splits before and after the hamstring injury. He had the hamstring in week 4. His first 4 designed run rates to start the year were 18%, 6%, 25%, and 15%. That's very much in line with where he's been over the previous few seasons. Once he came back from the hamstring injury, his average single game share the rest of the season was only 6%. So I think coming off an offseason to get healthy, I think we should see those design carries jump back up a little bit. I will say I think that 29 years old, for someone who's as dependent on running as him and who has done as much running as him, coming off a hamstring injury, there's at least reason to be non-zero concerned, but it's not like 29 is super old by any means. And it's not like he's getting a true running back workload, and he has been pretty good throughout his career at avoiding contact. So I'm mostly expecting the designed runs to come back, and the scrambling was still there, at least in terms of scrambling volume. So I feel okay investing in Lamar again this year, personally.
Yeah, and Gretch, I don't know how you split out your like quarterback rushing projections if you do a designed and a scramble aspect to it, but this year we're projecting 3.4 designed carries per game. I mentioned last year that was down at like 2 per game. In the previous years, it was more like 5.5. So we're in the middle a little bit, but kind of leaning slightly more into last year. Just to honestly be honest, a little conservative there. What are you projecting for his designed rush attempts per game this year?
So I do it as a ratio of dropbacks. I have it at, I'm just converting it right now. I have it at just over 4.04 design carries per game. What did you say you guys have it at?
Like 3.4.
Okay, so I do have it coming back. So and this is a huge thing. Like in the projection, he came out lower than I expected him to. I often have him come out high, but there's also the element of his passing efficiency, which like even last year in a tough year, his pass TD rate was 7%. He had an 8.7% the year prior. Back in 2019 when he was a QB1, he had an 8.0%. He's had several other years lower, 5%, 6%, but even those are high for most guys. And a big part of that gets back to the scramble rate, sometimes high sack rate, where when Lamar's actually putting an attempt up, it's usually a potentially high efficiency throw. Baltimore's offense is so fascinating to me because there's been times where under Lamar, they've looked completely unstoppable on offense, and people have set the expectations so high that then they talk about them as like chokers or they failed to meet expectations. And there's other times where they don't look great necessarily. I've long felt that at their peak, people sort of under or overstate how dominant they are because they can just lean on you so hard and win games in a way that makes you think that they're unstoppable. But it can be different. A few breaks go, you're in a negative game script. A few breaks go the different way. It's different. And I think that's what last year was. It's fascinating. I'm with Jack with the age stuff and like being a little concerned about the rushing. At the same time, 2024 was the best season of his career from a variety of standpoints. His sack rate plummeted that year. But I was really high on him last year when Leone and I did this stream because he got the sack rate way down and the passing efficiency up across the board. Yards per attempt up, pass TDs up. We talked with like the Caleb Williams stuff about how he got the sack rate down by throwing the ball away and taking hits on passing efficiency. What Lamar Jackson did in 2024 to get the sack rate down, the scramble rate came down, but not by a massive amount. It was still a lot, not as much as the sack rate came down. And he's getting the ball out efficiently when he is getting it out. Everything he was doing in the pocket, so much better in 2024 than even it had been prior in his career, which has been great at other times. 2025, all that went backwards, right? But he's played hurt for a bunch of it, as Jack noted. He gets hurt like in week 3 or 4 or whatever it was. Sack rate way back up, actually a career high. At the same time, the scramble rate is down. So he's trying to extend plays, but he's not getting into space, right? The pass efficiency comes down pretty much across the board. Completion percentage, yards per attempt, still pretty solid. Pass TD rate, still pretty solid at the end of the day, but not all of it. I mean, all of it pretty much did come down quite a bit. And so I'm doing this like long view thing. I'm zooming out again. I mean, his fantasy points per game in FFPC scoring in 2024 as the QB1 was 28.2. Josh Allen as the QB1 last year was 24.3. I think that's part of why last year was a late round QB year where Drake May and Matthew Stafford and stuff were so close to Allen because there was nobody that was separating these elite dual threat guys. But what Lamar did in 2024 would have smashed from a high QB ADP in 2025. And he had an even higher points per game back in that 2019 season, the other time he was the QB1. He's had some other years that have been lower. And my point is we know this profile can really hit when he's doing the things that, whatever it is, he's a magician, whatever it is that causes him to both scramble and throw efficiently at a really high rate, the playmaker vibe when he's holding the ball. If he can get back to that in a new offense, it almost doesn't matter what the pass volume is as well, because it's been really low pass volume. But again, he gets the per attempt efficiency to such elite numbers. The touchdowns are so elite. It's a really tricky one with Lamar. Like I said, the projection came out low for me, and then I went back and was like, I'm dumbing the scale. I'm adding rushing attempts to this. Like I looked at it again and I was like, this is probably low. The design run rate last year was so much lower than all the prior years, as you guys talked about. So I started adding some more design runs back a little bit. Also just thinking about the Derrick Henry fragility and like what they have at running back. They got to lean on his athleticism. I think he's so good with the ball in his hands, and he's not like old at all. I don't know what you can do from an offensive structure standpoint to like not use Lamar Jackson's athleticism. So I do think that's still going to be there. He's a very fascinating one. The main point, just to drive it all home, is like that I do think the ceiling is there, like Jack was saying, to justify a higher ADP, and it's actually a little lower this year than some other years because he's coming off a down season.
For sure. He is. That's a great point too. And that he is still going as the QB2, but his ADP right now on Underdog is 55, so going in the middle of the 5th round, whereas previous years you had to take him in the 3rd or 4th round for sure if you wanted Lamar. So you are getting that discount, even though positionally he is going as the QB2. And I think, just betting on Lamar to be a sick football player, sick fantasy quarterback long term is like kind of where I want to be. So I'm trying not to get too hung up on what last year turned into and kind of looking at the pass catcher core. But let's go to Derrick Henry, because that is another, massive fantasy point to talk through on this team. Gretch, you mentioned he is now 32 years old, but he's been the RB7 and RB3 in half PPR points per game since joining the Ravens. He's averaged 5.6 yards per carry in his Ravens career. And I was kind of looking at the yards before contact numbers, and he's at 3.0 yards per contact before per attempt in his Baltimore career, and it was 2.1 in Tennessee. So he's basically added like a free yard per carry. I think that's probably the Lamar effect. And Henry hasn't necessarily lost a step either. So when you're getting over 300 carries and getting extra yard before contact per attempt, that's a pretty solid boost there. He also led the NFL in carries inside the 10 and 5 yard line. Last season, he was second inside the 5 carries in 2024. So it's been a pretty bulletproof profile for Henry in a Baltimore uniform thus far, but I do think it really is age concern. So I don't know if there's a ton to diagnose here necessarily, but Jack, we are above market on Henry this year, which has not been the case in previous seasons. We have him ranked 13th overall in half PPR on Underdog. He's going at ADP around 18, and I think it's mostly like we haven't really changed any inputs on Derrick Henry. It's just the market has soured on him a little bit. Like he's been a 1-2 turn pretty much, if not higher, the last several seasons, and then for whatever reason he's down at ADP 18. So I don't know, Jack, any thoughts on Derrick Henry entering his age 32 season?
Yeah, I will say that compared to his first season in Baltimore, his efficiency stuff did drop a little bit. According to Pro Football Reference, his yards after contact per attempt was down 0.4. His attempts per broken tackle is how they do it. That was down quite a bit. I think part of the efficiency stuff, though, in general, is reliant on Lamar. So either not having Lamar or having an injured Lamar kind of affects that on the whole. But I also went back and looked at our 2025 season-long projections. And from a target and carry share standpoint, we are almost identical in terms of how we're projecting Derrick Henry. I think there's an argument to be made that maybe we should tick him down a little bit just because he's another year older. But he was also 32 years old or whatever he was last year at this time. So we were baking in the age stuff last year as well, and he just shoved it in our faces. So I think that kind of juxtaposing the fact that we already had age-related risks built in last year, combined with the fact that he had another monster season, kind of offsets it, and it makes sense that we're where we are, projecting him similarly to where we are last year. But you said it, that the market has soured on him this year. I think his ADP is 7 spots lower than it was last year, despite a relatively similar situation beyond being another year older.
Inputs wise, we're at 269 carries on Henry. Gretch is at 263, and then we're pretty much in lockstep on the targets and receptions. We're at 18 and a half targets. Gretch is at 19, and we also have the same efficiency at 4.7 yards per carry. So nearly identical across the board on Derrick Henry. Gretch, what's your interest level in a mid-second round ADP on Henry this season?
Well, I mean, I probably won't draft Henry all year, but that's just because of my own biases. But and he's done, stuffed me in lockers for years. But because I think it's sort of the small hit, big miss mentality, I guess. Like, I don't know that he actually can get to the RB1 overall ceiling. He's probably going to be productive. Having said that, when I go through the projection, I had a hard time not giving him a massive number of touchdowns, first of all. I mean, this is a team that actually projects for a ton of points because of the easy schedule and the high win total. And, like, is Adam Randall taking touchdowns? And that's the other thing. I had a hard time not projecting him for a massive number of rush attempts. I think Adam Randall's really interesting. Apparently, it was a pick by the owner, Steve Biscotti or whatever they were talking about, like the GM and the coach. They're all just like, yeah, it'll be interesting to see, what happens with him. He's versatile.
I have to say that doesn't make me feel great. That does not make me feel great. That was immediately dubbed as, oh yeah, this was the owner's selection on Adam Randall. So, yeah.
Wide receiver background. They've talked about loving his versatility, but they've also talked about special teams a lot. It's it's a Tyrone Tracy mold. He is very athletic. His like RAS was very strong. He's 232, but he's also tall for a running back at like 6'2". But he benched 26 times, which is quite a bit. Like, when I was watching some film on him, like, when he runs like a bigger dude, which is funny because Henry does too. Henry's obviously thick too, but Henry's a taller back. Most backs are 6 foot or smaller. Henry's like 6'3" and huge. But Randall's another tall, big back, but there's some stuff in his film for sure where he seems like he should get knocked down. He runs through some tackles, or he's able to fight near the goal line. So there's some stuff there, like being 232 and being a guy who benched really good, and then he had great jumps, only a 4.5 40. But I think he's a bigger runner than the other guys, than Justice Hill, who by the way is also 29 in November. Then Rasheen Ali, who's closer to like 200 pounds. Justice Hill, I think, last clocked at like just under 200 pounds. So those guys are a lot smaller. And then Randall, again, has the wide receiver background, so could come for some of Hill's receiving work as well. I think Adam Randall's kind of an interesting dude, and I do think if Henry went down, he's probably the guy that would get the bulk of the rushing. But I don't think with Henry being healthy, there's really any scenario where this converted wide receiver, literally converted in his final season. Last year was his first year as a full running back. I think he converted for the bowl game the year prior, and then they're like, yeah, well, you're going to be a running back the rest of the offseason. And then he had a good final year, but not like great or anything, especially the peripherals were kind of not off the charts or anything, which you'd kind of expect that for a guy who's converting to the position. But yeah, I think that's more of a long-term thing. With Henry, the other thing I would note is the fumbles last year, and there was some of the inefficiency stuff. He had some fumbles issues early on. They actually lost some games because of some key Derrick Henry fumbles, which has always been something he's been really like reliable about. I'm not saying that's predictive at all. I don't think it is, but I mean, I guess it's just sort of a reminder that like dudes, like age is a thing. Like guys do eventually age. Guys do eventually not be in their peak anymore. I don't think Derrick Henry in his peak like basically ever fumbled. This guy would just like run over you and then laugh at you. So I don't know. I think it's a tricky running back room for sure. But as far as the projection goes, yeah, I threw a ton on Derrick Henry. If you're inclined to be okay with the age and just trust the outlier nature of Henry and what he's always been, then I think you're totally fine to do that.
Yeah, I think Randall's a really unique case because he was handpicked by the owner, and it sounds like it was exclusively by the owner. It wasn't like a situation where they asked the owner for input. It sounds like the owner scouted this guy himself, like talked to Dabo Sweeney himself, called him himself, and like did everything by himself, which I mean doesn't sound great. I mean, it's a nice gesture that the owner can, I guess, do whatever he wants at any time, but I don't think that's going to be influencing Declan Doyle's like process on game day. And he's actually even taller than 6'2". He's almost 6'4", which is really tall for a running back. He was a good wide receiver recruit. He was almost the top 100 guy nationwide out of high school. Dane Brugler says that he has inconsistent vision and tempo at the line of scrimmage, which kind of makes sense given that he's still adjusting to the position. I mean, we talked about like Nick Singleton having bad vision. That's kind of a concern when you've been playing running back for a while. Adam Randall has 1 year of playing running back in his life, so it makes sense that he has inconsistent vision, and he can probably get better at that as he adjusts more to the position. But he does have the size, I guess, from a weight standpoint, to be second in line for carries. I do kind of think that if Henry went down, I mean, it's a new staff, but I think that Justice Hill has earned so much trust within the organization that he would probably see a boost in carries as well. And it would kind of be like maybe a 50-50 split where Justice is also getting the pass down work because they like his pass protection so much, which is such a big part of getting, running back passing down snaps, even though Randall has the actual wide receiver background. But Randall
They've brought in so many veterans. Like they'll probably go sign like Melvin Gordon or Devonta Freeman again, or maybe they'll call up Zeke Elliott or something.
James Conner.
James.
Yeah,
Conner.
I was going to mention. This could be another Cardinals running back landing spot because I don't know if the upside is really there for Justice Hill. I think he'll be involved in the pass game for sure. And yeah, I don't have a ton to add on Randall. So it is a spot where the fragility of Henry's age and his workload, that if he did go down, man, it's really tough to know kind of like where to go from a fantasy lens, because we know this is an extremely valuable running back position to have in fantasy, playing next to Lamar Jackson. So I don't know if anyone here is necessarily draftable but behind him, but certainly a spot to monitor as the offseason progresses. Let's go to the wide receivers here, again headlined by Zay Flowers. They also bring back Rashad Bateman, who had a pretty tough 2025 season. They draft Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt in the third and fourth round, and then Devontae Walker also back here. So kind of a lot of names to throw out in this wide receiver room. Certainly start with Zay Flowers, 25% target per out run and 2.6 yards per out run last year, according to our SIS data. Pretty in line with his 2024 metrics, just ticked up a little bit there in the yards per route run. Last year he was 9th in yards after catch per reception, also 7th in missed tackles for. So he had the same ADOT as the previous year, but his catch rate jumped up almost like 10 percentage points. So really efficient year for Zay Flowers last season. In terms of projections there, we're at 108 targets on Zay. Gretch is at 118. On Bateman, we're at 50.5 targets. Gretch is at 70 targets there. Surratt, we're at 37. Gretch is at 34. And Jacoby Lane, we're at 32 targets. Gretch is at 34. So I'm not sure how much fantasy value there is to be had in this wide receiver room behind Zay Flowers. Gretch, you're at 70 targets on Bateman. We're at 50.5, which is a pretty sizable gap there. And yet it was a rough, 2025 for Bateman, down to a 13% target per out run and 0.75 yards per out run. He only had 2 games above 25 receiving yards. So he's young, only 26 years old, was a first round pick, but I'm a little bit concerned that like all the nagging injuries throughout Bateman's career have caught up to him. Is Bateman someone that, it's just kind of like, you think he's going to be out on the field the most and therefore gave him the most targets, or do you think a bounce back is in store for Rashad Bateman?
He's a fascinating one. I think going into last year or during the season the year prior when Lamar was having that great 2024 season, people were noting that the Ravens pass catchers all had these great like separation scores and all these things. And I even remember there was some like implication that Lamar was being saved by the fact that he had all these great receivers, or he was the beneficiary of that. And it was like, maybe that's Lamar Jackson, something he's doing that's affecting the way that you guys are charting this. In 2025, with things not going well on a team level, you see several players' efficiency go the wrong direction all at once, from Mark Andrews to Bateman to Isaiah Likely, like significantly the wrong direction. The one guy it doesn't go the wrong way for is Zay Flowers. I get to beat Jack on the fun note here that he had on Tucker Kraft that I'm sure he's ready to note, that Flowers has improved both his targets per out run and his yards per target every year, and his yards per out run has gone up. This guy is getting better on more volume as he goes. In a bad situation last year where everyone else got worse, he got better. His depth-adjusted racer, that stat I keep giving, has been great all 3 years. The ball in hand stuff is great. The catch rates are great. Zay Flowers, low-key star. Like, just absolute stud. Feels like it has to be a big Zay Flowers year, honestly, for me. And that was my big takeaway in the notes. I'm a little surprised I'm higher than you guys on Bateman, but it's more just I'm looking at multiple years and trying to figure it out. And when you look at him over multiple years, it's really hard. It's all over the place. One of the ways in that Field Tippers article, I described it as he is a higher ADOT guy. So probably at the whims of deep efficiency year in, and year out a little bit. You go back to 20. So here's his yards per target by year. Go back to his rookie year, 2021 even. 7.6, 10.2, 6.6, 10.7, 5.9. I mean, these are massive shifts in terms of going from well below average to well above average. His touchdown rate, 1.5%, then 7.1%, then 1.6%, then 13.9% in 2024. Everybody wanted to draft him last year. It was at 5.3% last year, which is like, at least splitting the difference, somewhat reasonable. But the volume was way down, as you said. Targets per game, 5.7, 4.7, 3.6, 4.4. And then it was down to 2.9 last year, just in terms of raw targets. The catch rate all over the place. It was 50% last year. It was 65 the year prior at a higher ADOT, 15.2 ADOT in 2024. The ADOT was actually down a little bit last year. I don't know what to make of Rashad Bateman. Like, it is really all over the place year over year. I do think the stuff I was saying about Lamar's numbers across the board getting a little bit worse, and I mean, so maybe some of that's on Bateman. Maybe the fact that Bateman's getting open and he was able to find Bateman early the year prior was what was helping the sack rate being down and the per attempt efficiency being up. Certainly Bateman's stuff spiked a ton in 2024, and then it was putrid last year. It was way down at the other end of the spectrum. So in terms of what he actually is, I don't know. I'll say on the rookies, like, I think they're both interesting. I do think it's a little bit. I actually tend to like Elijah Surratt a little bit more. The Lane goes in the 3rd round, Surratt goes in the 4th. It's interesting because he is going a little higher on underdog, so that seems to be the popular opinion. With Lane, they've been talking a lot about it's all about catch radius. He is 6'4", great jumps, far better athlete than Surratt, but Surratt had more than double the collegiate yardage. I like to look at the production stuff. This guy gets open. He had 15 TDs at Indiana last year, won the national championship. His production was close to Omar Cooper last year, and then he was actually quite a bit better than Omar Cooper in 2024. Cooper, the 1st round pick for the Jets. Surratt goes in round 4. He's not seen as good of an athlete, and some of the stuff that Cooper brings in addition to that. Cooper's got some good ball in hand and stuff. But Surratt, bigger body dude, didn't test super athletic, but I think that's less important for a wide receiver. He seems to have kind of the skill set to just get open and draw volume. Lane is this guy that, again, it's all about catch radius, and it's this sort of skill set that I think is probably not great for fantasy. Contested catches are tough to live on. It's kind of the red zone discussion, and it's really what they used DeAndre Hopkins for, I think, in the offense last year. Lamar, they've talked a little bit about liking Lamar likes a big catch radius guy and throwing into these one-on-ones and stuff, but I tend to like Surratt a little more, but I guess I think Bateman is probably, the clear number 2 running routes, and then I projected both Surratt and Lane for the same number of targets, and you guys are, right in the same range, basically.
Yeah, and the volume is probably pretty unlikely to be there for anyone past the wide receiver 2, even if that wide receiver 2 does command much volume. It's going to be much lower than several, or the rest of the league for the most part, just given the lack of pass attempts Baltimore consistently has year over year. And I think my concern with Bateman coming off the really poor years is they do draft Lane and Surratt, who are predominantly outside players in college, especially, and that's where Bateman's been. He's been 87% out wide in his career, and then Devontae Walker, who was a field stretcher, kind of like sacrificial X last year, was 82% out wide. So I'm a little bit worried that the routes squeeze for Bateman on top of the inefficient year. But I do want to round up here, Jack, on Zay Flowers, because he has been ascending the last few years, and is set up to smash. I think the targets really could condense around him again, just kind of the lackluster other options in this wide receiver room. But he is, going as the wide receiver 14, which is where he finished last year, or he was the wide receiver 13 and half PPR points per game last year. So I'm curious if you think there's much more meat on the bone for Zay Flowers, if you're interested in drafting him just outside of, the wide receiver 1 range.
Yeah, I did have the same note as Gretch on the yards per target and targets per run. Per SIS, his targets per run actually dropped 0.01 last year, but the yards per run has exploded. 1.81 as a rookie, 2.4 in year 2, 2.6 last year. He's gotten really, really good, and the fact that he averaged more than 10 yards per target last year, despite Lamar missing time, playing with backup quarterbacks, and then Lamar coming back hampered, is really, really impressive. The only thing with Zay is, which we kind of talked about with Lamar, is that the run heaviness of the offense enables everyone here, including Lamar, including Zay, to be so efficient. And so despite getting really, really good, he still topped out at 118 targets in 17 games last year. So I don't know what the raw target ceiling looks like just in this offense that we know is going to run the football a bunch. But I think that the potential for him to separate as a target earner is certainly there this year. And I think it could be a spot where we could even come up on his target share. And then I'll add on Bateman. He had in 2024 9 touchdowns on 72 targets. On his other 190 career targets, he has 6 total touchdowns. So I think some of the euphoria last year was just fueled by touchdown variance in 2024. His target shares before the high ankle sprain last year actually weren't totally terrible. He had some really low games. He had 2 games of 6% or below, but every other game was 14% or higher, which in the Ravens offense isn't awesome, but it's not a laughable target share. But during that stretch, he only averaged 22 receiving yards per game, which kind of goes back to the whole thing that you really need to separate as a target earner like Zay has to be fantasy relevant in this offense, given the pass volume, or you need to catch a bunch of touchdowns like Bateman did in 2024.
I just took 2 percentage points off Bateman and put one on Lane and Surratt each when Dank made the point that they drafted 2 outside wide receivers. You're making, and I think I needed to put more after what Jack said. But no, I think you guys are right about Bateman. I think I was too high on Bateman for sure. I hadn't really thought through that point. But I did want to jump in on the Flowers note about the target cap. I think it's a really good stack situation because of the Derrick Henry thing. If Derrick Henry does go down, the pass rate could actually be significantly higher. And again, like the whole bet with the Lamar thing is I was going through all that. To me, he's like the CMC of quarterbacks. He's like the Puka Nacua of quarterback. Those are 2 guys that when I go through the projections, it's like I have to mute some of the stuff or else they can just project so much higher than everyone else. Lamar's projection can wind up being like sort of silly if you look at some, I mean, not last year's rates, but if he's hitting at a ceiling, Lamar, and they're actually throwing a little bit more because maybe Derrick Henry's injured, then I think Zay Flowers' targets could go pretty nuts as well. I mean, like I really like the pass volume correlation for those 2 directionally.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point with this pass game on the whole, because from like a player level standpoint, we're projecting player level ceilings. Like we have ceiling rush shares on Justice Hill and Adam Randall if Derrick Henry goes down, but we're not projecting anything from a team level standpoint ceiling wise. So I think this is probably the best example, but league wide, like any other examples where a running back injury, like maybe Jonathan Taylor going down, could impact the Colts pass rate. I think that those are probably situations where maybe the way our projections are set up, at least where we don't have team level ceiling projections. So the way that that's set up, maybe we are missing a little bit of the upside with the pass catchers there.
Yeah, and that's just one of the natural limitations of season long projections as well. There's only kind of so many corners you can cover, and we are projecting Lamar to start all season and Derrick Henry to be healthy all season for the most part there. And in terms of stacking partners, I do think Mark Andrews is a really interesting talking point as well. Again, just they lose Isaiah Likely to the Giants this offseason. They do draft a couple tight ends, but a 4th round pick in Matthew Hibner and a 5th round pick in Josh Cuevas. And then they bring over Durham Smythe, who follows Declan Doyle from Chicago. And Durham Smythe has had 23 targets in 34 games the last 2 seasons. So shouldn't really factor in to the pass game. But if you told me last year that Mark Andrews was going into a season without Isaiah Likely as a counterpart and is going to be drafted as the tight end 11, I would be taking him pretty much every single time. But last year was a really rough season for Andrews. He had career lows in ADOT and yards after catch per reception, which is something like we talked about with DK Metcalf on the last team that was kind of inverse. He had a low ADOT but a higher yards after catch per reception. For Andrews last year, it was career lows on both, which is obviously not a good recipe for production. He still did though have a 22% target per out run according to SIS, and also had a 7% touchdown rate last year. His 8% career touchdown rate is really elite, one of the best among tight ends, and that's been consistent throughout his seasons or throughout his career. So this is a guy I'd really love to get back in on. He will turn 31 on September 6th, so is above that dreaded age 30 season. But we mentioned throughout this series that tight ends can continue to be productive into their 30s. So I'm having a hard time not kind of getting all the way back in on Mark Andrews. I really think the opportunity is there, and it could be a pretty monster season for him if we again just throw out last year. But in terms of projections here, We're at 69 targets on Andrews, and Gretch is at 78. In terms of yards per target, we're about the same. We're at 7.7. Gretch is at 7.8. So man, this is I would love to get back in on Mark Andrews this year. I think things are really open for him to have a big season. So curious, Gretch, your read on if last year was the start of like a big drop off for Andrews, or if this year is kind of correctable and he can be back to being one of the better fantasy tight ends.
Yeah, I think you put it all really well. I had in my notes the yak per reception being more than a full yard lower than any other year of his career at 2.1 yards after catch per reception. He's always been at least at 3 or 4 yards per catch after the catch per reception kind of guy. Not great. The evasion rate, the missed tackles forced per reception down from the bulk of his career. Targets per out run fell for the third straight year. Not looking good. That going the wrong direction because of the ball in hand stuff. The yards per target. The PFF numbers I have him at 6.5. I mean, he's typically a 9.0 or higher guy. Like the 2 years prior, he was a 9.0 or higher. 2022 is at 7.7, his previous career low, but still, more than a full yard better than what he had done in 2025. So it's a little bit like the Jerry Jeudy thing that I was talking about, where like none of this is in line with previous seasons of his career. His previous career low yards per out run by the PFF numbers 1.88. In 2024, it has been declining a little since the early season stuff, early career stuff, when he was like over 2 every year. But still, 1.88, great for a tight end. You'll take that. The only issue with him has always been routes volume. And it's like he's very efficient per route. He went all the way down to 1.23 from that career low of 1.88. Both on the targets per outside and the yards per target side. It's the inverse of Zay. We're losing volume and we're losing efficiency. And when he's always been a guy who hasn't got enough routes but has been efficient per route, and then we lose the efficiency. And then the difference with the Jeudy thing, I'm talking about him being 27, Andrews being 31 in September, as you mentioned. I am concerned that we're at the back. That's why I go back to, like, it feels like it has to be a big Zay Flowers year. But I do acknowledge what you're saying about it. The opportunities available for him. I think you guys are right about the Bateman stuff. And then you have a lot of young guys otherwise. You have 2 rookie receivers, 2 rookie tight ends. Those tight ends are kind of interesting. The fact that they went and drafted those guys is probably not speaking very well about their long-term view of Andrews either, right? They're trying to do some things. I think both those guys look somewhat interesting. They seem to really like Hibner. They have talked a lot about his athleticism. They mentioned his jumps and how he tested multiple times, because they keep talking about like his numbers are great, but like his receiving numbers were not necessarily amazing. I mean, he had some decent years at SMU, but he was at Michigan for 3 years and did nothing, and then basically had to transfer to a smaller school and catch a few passes. And Cuevas, sort of the opposite. He was at UW, and then he went to Alabama and did some stuff at Bama. But anyway, both of them have limited receiving production, but some, Hibner looks like a pretty athletic dude, though, and they seem to talk favorably about him. And I don't know, I kind of think that both those guys might be a little bit more of an issue for Andrews than it feels like when we're doing projections or looking at week 1, like by the time the season progresses. But it's tough to say. I mean, I think you're right. If he bounces back and he's back to who he is, like the opportunity is definitely there.
Yeah, and I think it's probably, or I don't know. I'd be curious your guys' thoughts on if it's like a better bet in redraft or best ball, because it's almost like in redraft, if you have Andrews on your team and like he bounces back and you're like, oh boy, I have a top 5 tight end at a tight end 12 or later price tag, that's pretty awesome. Whereas in best ball, you can't cut him if like the season starts and he looks washed again. So that might be more my angle, but it's certainly, again, if you just kind of take the long view of what Andrews has meant to this offense and the opportunity, and then if Lamar does have a bounce back year, it's something I think has a lot of upside just at his current price tag. But I am battling quite a bit on if he's donezo or not. All right, let's go on to the last team of the division here. That is the Cincinnati Bengals. We saved the team with the most continuity for last year, as they are bringing back their head coach and play caller in Zach Taylor. Joe Burrow returns here, and really no I guess like big additions. They did draft Colby Young in the 4th round at wide receiver, but otherwise a pretty status quo offensive environment here for the Bengals. In terms of team level inputs here, we're at 62.4 plays. Gretch is at 62.8. We're at a 64.1% pass rate. Gretch is at a 63.5% pass rate. So as this division has been going, we are mostly in lockstep on on the team level stuff, the 64.1% pass rate projection for us is the highest in the NFL for the Bengals. They finished second in each of the last 3 seasons in terms of raw pass rate, did the Bengals, and that's been, with Joe Burrow injured for much of 2 of those 3 seasons. So I feel like we can feel very confident in, this passing game, or this offense going through the passing game and Joe Burrow. There also were some positive notes from Thorman in his pace column about how like that pass rate, leads to such a high floor and ceiling for Bengals, games and their raw play environment year over year. They've ranked top 10 in combined plays in 3 of the last 4 seasons. So, pretty high floor and ceiling here, just kind of all around. And then they did bring back Joe Flacco as a backup quarterback, which, I think is a decent sign for fantasy, just given how much they continue to throw with Flacco under center last year, led to some monster Jamar Chase games. So I think this is a pretty awesome fantasy environment here. Jack, what's your read on the Bengals running it back this season?
Yeah, I think we mostly know what to expect. With Burrow healthy last year, they had at least a 5% pass rate over expectation in 5 of the 7 games. They ran a bunch of plays, as Thorman has alluded to with Burrow last year, 64.7 real plays per game. I think we know that this is going to be a voluminous offense from a play volume standpoint, and that they want to throw the ball a bunch. They have made some efforts to improve the defense. This offseason, they lost Trey Hendrickson, obviously, but they added Dexter Lawrence. They added Boye Mafe. I think they drafted an edge rusher in the 2nd round. So I think they're trying to be better defensively, obviously, but it remains to be seen whether they can actually escape from the disastrous tier that they were in last year. But I think mostly from an offensive standpoint, we know what to expect with the Bengals, especially as long as Burrow's healthy.
Yeah, let's get into Burrow then right off the bat here. Just, in terms of our inputs, we're pretty similar to Gretch across the board. We have a 55.7% completion rate. Gretch at 66.4%. We're a little bit lower on the TD rate and efficiency side. We're at 7.3 yards per attempt and only at 33 touchdowns, whereas Gretch is up closer to 37. That is a spot I do think we could potentially bump. Burrow has been a 6% TD rate guy since his rookie season. We project 5.5%. So that might be a spot where we're a little light there on Burrow. One thing I want to note on him was that he had a career low 5.1 rush yards per game last season. He's never been much of a rusher, but he's kind of, hovered more in like the 11 to 15 range throughout his career, which, adds a fantasy point per game. And so that kind of evaporated last year. Obviously he did suffer that turf toe injury and required surgery. So I think probably that sapped his mobility and just interest in running. Maybe that bounces back a little bit, but we've kind of seen a wide range on Burrow outcomes over the last handful of seasons. Last year's the QB 15 in points per game was the QB 3 in 2024, QB 23 in 2023, and then the QB 4 once again in 2022. So I think for a guy that gets drafted as high as he does in fantasy leagues, he's going as the QB5 right now on Underdog. He doesn't necessarily have kind of like the rushing floor component that keeps his, outlook very consistent. There's a pretty wide range there in his QB finishes. So Gretch, curious your thoughts on Joe Burrow. Obviously, if he stays healthy, he should smash with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins at the helm here. Is he someone you'd be actively targeting this year in fantasy leagues?
Probably not, just because we've talked about the number of later round QBs that are strong. And if you're going to take a really high end QB, I think you need the ceiling to be just so enormous. But I do think it makes sense where his ADP is, because you talked about the pass TD rate has been so strong, the completion percentage so strong. It doesn't have the rushing, but he does have hyper efficient receivers that always carry the passing efficiency. I mean, that works both ways, obviously, but Jamar Chase is going to add a ton of yak and is going to add a bunch of stuff to what you're doing. And then Burrow is a very efficient passer and gets the ball to these guys so that there's run after the catches. Running backs have always had really good run after the catch. Like no matter who he's throwing to, they seem to always have good receiving efficiency throughout his career. Higgins obviously is a very efficient player. I mean, Burrow's an incredibly good quarterback. And then as far as the pass TD rate's concerned, third easiest strength of schedule here, strong Vegas win total. We probably could have mentioned it earlier, but this division lines up to play the entire NFC South and the entire AFC South this year, as they're like divisions on each side that they get to play. So all these teams end up with really strong strength of schedule ratings. It's a pretty favorable division from that perspective. And so you're going to have a high touchdown projection, and they don't like run a lot in near the goal line. Like Chase Brown's going to have a decent, touchdown season. Probably he actually tends to run a really hot receiving TD rate because the running backs do have good efficiency. But I mean, Samaje Perine's your backup, maybe Taj Brooks. I mean, we'll get into the backs, but they're going to skew. They tend to skew when Burrow's healthy toward the pass TDs. And so you get a pretty good projection that way as well. It's not hard to get Burrow into a strong projection. I just don't know that like paying top dollar from an ADP standpoint, the other positions drop off so much like quicker. That's the whole idea behind late round QB. You can take elite players at other positions or, second tier players or what have you where Burrow goes, but you really need to take your swings at running back and wide receiver and tight end when you can in those rounds. You can probably get a guy who can spike a pass TD rate. Like we talked about like Matthew Stafford. Is Matthew Stafford, I mean, he's not going to have the same pass rate as Burrow, but is he going to look that different if he spikes a pass TD rate again this year? I'm a little skeptical. So as far as the actual strategy of it, I'm probably out on Burrow, but yeah, the projection looks great.
Yeah. All right, let's go to the backfield. Chase Brown is going as a mid-second round pick this year in terms of our inputs. We're at 212 carries on Chase Brown. Gretch is at 232. We're at 58 targets. Gretch is at 71 there, so a little bit higher in both facets. On Samaje Perine, we're at 73 carries. Gretch is at 47. We're at 20 targets. Gretch 17 there. And then he has Taj Brooks for a lot more carries than we do. He's at 79, Gretch is, and we're at 37 on Taj Brooks. So we kind of have like the RB2 rushing workload flipped between Perine and Taj Brooks, and that has been a spot that we've been well ahead of the best ball market on Perine kind of as a last round pick. And I'm curious or interested to talk through that just because Perine's role, I think coming into last year, re-signing with the Bengals after being with the Chiefs most recently, and like Perine had always been a pass down specialist. So we kind of thought, okay, Chase Brown will get vast majority of the rushing work, and then Perine will supplement on pass downs and won't get much involvement on the ground. But it was honestly a little bit the opposite, whereas Perine ate in more carry-wise, especially in the middle of the season, and didn't get a whole lot of run in the pass game. Perine was only at 28% routes on the season, whereas Brown was at 53%. And then Perine, in terms of carries, in the games that they played together starting in week 3, Chase Brown had 65% of the carries over Perine, and Perine had the other 35% there. So only 12 carries per game for Chase Brown in that stretch. So I only bring that up just because it was a different split than I think we were anticipating coming in to last year. And so we kind of expect that to roll over to this year, but maybe Taj Brooks in his second year does take more of kind of that RB2 rushing work. So let's get back to Chase Brown though. Just he is the premier fantasy target here again, going in the middle of the second round. Jack, curious your thoughts on Chase Brown's outlook for this upcoming season.
Yeah, the receiving role last year was amazing. 13.8% target share was very strong for running back. 24% target per hour run is good. He had a positive ADOT. According to our numbers, he had 88 targets in total. Just a very strong receiving role for Chase Brown. I think the rushing split was very interesting, as you alluded to, because starting in week 3, Perine did start getting legitimate carries, and then he missed a couple of weeks. I think it was weeks 11 and 12 that Perine missed. And Brown had a good couple of games, over 5.5 yards per carry in both games. And then he came back, and the split was actually tighter than it was before he got hurt. Over the final 6 games of the season, it was 87 Chase Brown carries and 52 Samaje Perine. Maybe part of that was like the wanting to preserve Chase Brown a little bit. But I think that we're kind of projecting it more Chase Brown than it was last year, but still expecting Perine to have a role. It looks like Gretch is a little lower on Perine and higher on Brooks than us. So I'm curious how he sees that split. But in terms of Chase Brown specifically, I think it makes sense to expect clear RB1 again, should get a bunch of targets. The rushing split, I think, is a little uncertain after how it went down last year, but still he's going to get the lion's share of carries.
Yeah, Brown, I mentioned the stat a little bit ago when we were talking about the Steelers, 6 backs over 85 targets last year, and then there was just one more between 60 and 85. But Brown was one of those 6 backs above 85 targets. I mentioned all those guys have high ADPs this year. I think he's the lowest of all of them that are, other than Gainwell, which we talked about with the Steelers, but that are top backs. It's a great receiving role. And I mentioned the catch rate's always really high. He had 69 receptions on the 88 targets. Now, Joe Flacco played a bunch, and he throws to the backs a lot, so you can say that's sort of a Joe Flacco stat to a degree, but he had 54 balls in 54 catches in 16 games the year prior. Brown did, and Burrow again always been really good for receiving. Brown ran the 4th most routes of any running back. They love him as a pass protector. Talk about him as a 3-down back and on pass downs and what he's grown into. Samaje Perine, supposed to be a receiving back, really. Had a .48 yards per route run, was below any of his recent seasons, turns 31 in September. He's on an affordable contract. He signed a 2-year contract last offseason when they brought him back, so he's definitely going to be on the team. But I'm a little skeptical. He did total a decent yards per carry at 4.5 yards per carry. It was actually a solidly negative EPA per attempt, and he only carried from under center 9.5% of the time. It's mostly shotgun rush attempts, and with a negative EPA, even despite the 4.5 yards per carry, it kind of suggests like give up carries on 3rd and longs to a certain degree with him. And with the yards per out run really cratering, his yak per reception was way down. His yards per target, 4.4, way down. He still had a decent evasion rate, but again, at this age, it suggests that even when he creates some space, the explosiveness is not there because the yak and the yards per target on the pass game just not really all that impressive. As far as like, I'm not like super clear that it's going to be Taj Brooks. I'm not really sure who it would be. I do think thinking of Perine as the number 2 at this age after what he did last year, because he was the number 2 last year, is potentially wrong. Is potentially like the wrong way to think through how this year will go. I did like Taj Brooks.
You mean the 2 in terms of like a handcuff? Sorry to cut you off. Do you mean
right,
like
yes.
RB2 in terms of like a handcuff? So yeah, if Chase Brown gets injured, then like Taj is probably more likely to handle the more touches in that scenario.
Yeah. I think Perine may still have a pass protector role or be a receiving back, but yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on a limb here, like when I say that that's wrong, so I'm kind of saying it delicately. But like the fact that they like Chase Brown on 3 downs as well is kind of interesting. Like, and the Brown ran the 4th most routes and all these things. Like, I agree with what Jack said. Brown's going to play a ton, and then it's like, what role does Perine have? Does he have just like long down and distance and kind of like a very select role? The Brooks thing again, he's a round 6 pick. I don't know that it's going to be him. I did kind of like the profile. He's a little bit of a bigger back and could do some of the different things. Part of the reason I'm like reading the tea leaves on him is Chase Brown himself went from 58 touches as a rookie to nearly 300 as a lead back in year 2. And a bunch of people, and I liked the Brown profile back then and was in on Brown, and he was a day 3 back. A bunch of people were like, he's not going to do it. I mean, he barely touched the ball at all. I remember that discussion a couple years ago. They kind of brought him along slowly going into year 2. I think it's possible that Taj Brooks is that year 2 bet this year. That kind of the fact that they didn't really add anyone. They added some rookie UDFAs, Jamal Haynes and Kentrell Bullock, but their profiles don't really pop to me. I'm kind of like want to keep an eye on camp news here, but I feel like Taj Brooks might be like a low-key solid late round handcuff.
Yeah, I think it's a good point that he is probably the stronger upside handcuff that you would want. I would be pretty surprised if Perine wasn't involved just as like the RB2 in terms of kind of the normal offensive flow next year, just kind of given he was solid for them, but again as we've all alluded to, it was kind of an odd deployment for Perine last year, more involved on the ground and much less so in the passing game, and his metrics in the pass game did dip. So there certainly is a decent amount of risk there. I don't necessarily love being like way ahead of ADP on him in best ball because I don't really know what upside there is, but they did turn to him around the goal line a little bit. He had 4 carries inside the 5, whereas Brown only had 7. They both had 2 TDs in that sample. So, he was used a little bit, and Brown did not miss a game. So that was kind of playing alongside Brown there. But I don't know. Anyway, let's go to the wide receiver.
I mean, the key is you have a really good offense that are like potentially in plus scripts, really good Vegas win total, and there's like no depth behind the lead back that the market doesn't even like draft as high as his work, like, because they don't think he's a superstar or anything, is basically my point. I mean, it's a good backup situation at target. Maybe I'm wrong on Perine, but like it does seem like the secondary running back situation in Cincinnati is something to think about.
Wide receiver room, always one to talk through as well, just given how condensed the targets have been over the years here with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins leading the way. Jamar Chase, one of the best fantasy football bets over the last handful of seasons, has finished as the wide receiver 3, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 12, wide receiver 6, and wide receiver 5 and half PPR points per game over the last 5 seasons. Really just, I think, kind of quarterback agnostic. We saw him blow up with Joe Flacco last year, and just one of the best players in the NFL, as well as fantasy assets. In terms of projections here, we're at 156 targets on Chase. Gretch is at 172. On T. Higgins, we're at 104 targets. Gretch at 117 there. And then Andre Yoshivas is the wide receiver 3 here. We're at 46 targets on him. Gretch at 40. So Yoshi or Yoshivas, I don't think necessarily, fantasy relevant. So let's just stick to the top 2 guys here. Ja'Marr Chase, you're not sneaking to buy anyone going in round 1, but again, kind of mentioned at the top, just given the pass rate that the Bengals have shown over the last few years, I think in Chase's ability, it's just one of the most, sure bets in fantasy you can make. So Jack, curious your thoughts on Ja'Marr Chase this season, and then feel free to add on T. Higgins there as well, who's been a great per game producer, but has struggled to stay healthy a little bit over the last few years.
Yeah, we have it like razor's edge margin between picks 2 through 5, which is Bijan, Puka, JSN, and Chase. We have Chase 4th right now in that group on Underdog. He's led the league in targets in back-to-back years. We literally have those 4 within 1 point of each other total. After the NFC West podcast, we tried to get Puka up to 3, and to get Puka up to 3, we had to bump his catch rate by 0.05%. So it's just like incredibly tight between those 4. I think you know exactly what you're getting with Ja'Marr Chase. If you wanted to take him 2nd, I wouldn't really argue with you. If you want to take him 5th, I wouldn't really argue with you either. T. Higgins, his target per out run fell off pretty dramatically last year. He had a 24% target share and basically matched Chase in targets per out run in 2024, according to our numbers. Last year, he only had a 15% target share with Burrow. The red zone role is still incredibly strong. He had a career high 11 touchdowns last year, despite Burrow's injuries, and he remains the clear wide receiver 2 and one of the best passing offenses in the league. So I think that the role is pretty entrenched there. But I did think that the drop off in target earning efficiency was notable. But yeah, I think that these 2, we've seen it year over year with these guys. There's been some fluctuation on the T side from a target share standpoint, but on the whole, you kind of know what you're getting with both of these guys.
We have a pretty standard gap here between Chase and Higgins. We're about 15 targets behind Gretch on Chase and 13 on T. So, I don't think massive there, but it is interesting if you do look at the seasonal splits back to 2024. Like Jack mentioned, that T was much closer to Ja'Marr in terms of, like the per route data. So Gretch, I don't know if you have any lean there in terms of kind of like the seasonal splits, or if you think T like could encroach much more in terms of like the target earning potential this upcoming season.
My take on Chase is he as an absolute superstar, always had a weird targets per out run that had never been above 25% on PFF, which like the elites are, Puka Nacua was at like 32. Like they're up around 30 at least. Like Justin Jefferson, all of his prime. When Chase and Jefferson were the 1-2 for a couple of years, it's like, well, Jefferson's at 28, 29% targets per out, and Chase is at 24. We're really banking on efficiency here, but he also has a low ADOT because they throw to him close to the line of scrimmage. Kind of weird. Last year, he got that up to 28.8% for the first time. Also had a career low 7.8 yards per target. And I think those things go hand in hand to some degree from the perspective that Chase's own efficiency in prior years probably took some targets away from himself. He's just housing stuff, and it's like, all right, well, we don't need to throw anymore. What I loved about that is even as the inefficiency was a minor issue, the volume just kept flooding in, and you love to see that from a first-round receiver, that there's basically not situations where Chase is ever going to get like forgotten about or is anything other than elite. Joe Burrow's out. The offense is different. He still leads the NFL in targets a different way. The other thing about the Chase and T. Higgins thing, as I look at it, you're talking about the per route change. We can make excuses for Higgins from a health perspective. 523 routes last year. Ja'Marr Chase over 600 in the same offense, 632. Career high for Higgins, 537. Chase has been over 600 in this offense each of the last 3 years. He was at 579 as a rookie in 2021, was about 100 higher than Higgins that year. He's blown Higgins out of the water in total routes 4 of the 5 years they've played together, and then they were like close 1 year. Chase's second year and Higgins' third year in 2022. They were close in routes. Higgins had a few more. But at this point, I mean, with Higgins, I mean, I tend to fade some of the health stuff, but when this guy's losing 100 routes every year relative to his team's pass rate, I do have some real issues about that. And in terms of like how much he's going to cut into Chase or any of those kinds of things, I mean, I guess I'm not that concerned about it from Jamar Chase's perspective. This dude answers the bell every week. He's out there. He's going to run 600 plus routes. And regardless of whether he's hyper efficient on the targets he gets or there's Joe Flacco in there and there's some incompletions, he'll just keep earning volume. He's going to get his targets. He's going to be super productive. I think after what he did with Flacco last year, he's an even better pick than he was last year when he was the 101, even though his ADP is going to naturally come down a bit. And Jahmyr Gibbs is frankly just a better pick than anyone was last year. And so I agree with Jack. Like, he's right in there in that 2 to 5 range. But I think what we saw last year, his ability to produce without Burrow and in a different way, just makes him look even that much better going to Jamar Chase is a superstar, like just an insane player. At the same time, like, yeah, he does have T. Higgins there. There are these like thin razor edges. I tend to agree. I probably am going to rank Puka ahead of Chase when I do my own rankings. Like, but yeah, I mean, he belongs in the top 5. For sure. And bottom line, it's another really strong like top or first round and top half of the first round specifically. I know Leone was on that last year. I think in terms of like the Ashton Genty fade, we were a little bit lower than market. And he's like, honestly, I think it's just because the first round is extremely strong. And I think we have a similar case this year, especially like the top 5 or 6 picks. I think you can feel pretty awesome loading up with any of those guys on your team.
Yeah, just a note on Yoshi while we're on the Bengals receiving room. Seeing that Gretch is lower than us and we are right now 3 picks ahead of market, I do think that that's a spot where maybe we could lower his target share, largely because there were some games last year without T. Higgins where he was out-targeted by Mitchell Tinsley despite out-routing Tinsley. So Yoshi was the wide receiver 2 as expected from a route standpoint, but still didn't earn targets despite T. Higgins missing time. I mean, that's a really bad sign. We know he's the wide receiver 3, but what does the hit actually look like? And even when he missed time last year, we didn't really see.
That's exactly what I had in my notes on him. He had his targets per out run the last couple of years right around 10%. His career high yards per out run 0.84. And then I wrote that he could definitely see some threats to his number 3 role. Exactly the way Jack just put it. I see him as a number 3, but Tinsley made some great plays. He was inefficient overall, but he had some like really like some. They were like throwing him like hero shots. He was making some sweet catches on some plays. He's like the Isaac Tesla of the AFC. And then they got the rookie, right? Colby Young.
Yeah, and he's akin size wise to Yoshivas as well. Like Yoshi is 6'3", 210, and Colby Young, who they drafted in the 4th round, is 6'4", 215. So that I think that's kind of been like, the saving grace of Yoshi is that he's a big body and has trust with Joe Burrow. So he's had some pretty solid red zone and touchdown production. But I think that profile is pretty fragile. So I agree. I'd totally be fine docking his targets a little bit because he's not someone I think really has much upside in fantasy at all at this point. He's has kind of flubbed the opportunities to show that he can be a target earner when any of the top guys are out.
Yeah, the young note I wanted to just throw out there, he only ran 246 routes over the past 2 years for Georgia combined. He was decent for Miami earlier, big and athletic, but I don't think of him as like a 2026 play because he didn't play a lot the last couple years. I think they're probably trying to develop him a little bit, but to your point, yeah, I mean, he could be a direct threat to Joseph by like the end of the year.
Yeah, and we'll get into the tight end room, but Mike Gesicki is one of those tight ends that's essentially a wide receiver in practicality. Like he's listed at tight end in fantasy leagues, but since joining the Bengals, he's had last year he had 97% of his pass snaps came in the slot or out wide. It was 91% in the prior season, so he's not getting any inline snaps. He is essentially a wide receiver for this Bengals team, and we've seen his production really tick up when T. Higgins is off the field specifically. Jamar Chase has stayed mostly healthy. So I think that could be a contingency play as well if either of these guys go down. But since the start of 2024, Gesicki has an 11% target share and 16% target per out run with both Chase and T on the field. If you take T off, that goes to a 15% target share and a 24% target per route run. So, he's mostly a contingency play, I think fine in best ball, not necessarily, a redraft guy by any means, unless they do lose one of the top 2 guys in this passing game. But this tight end room continues to be a little bit muddled. They also have, now 3rd-year player Eric All coming back. He tore his ACL in his rookie season and then missed all of 2025. So he projects to be back in this tight end room. Gesicki, leading the charge target-wise for us. We're at 49 targets on Gesicki. Gretch is at 61. On Eric All, we're at 26 targets. Gretch is at 12 there. Drew Sample is in here as well. We have 17 targets. Gretch at 18. And then Tanner Hudson, team preseason MVP. Tanner Hudson, we're at 17 targets. Gretch is at 28 there. So it's really spread out a lot. I think Gesicki is really the only one to talk through. But I did want to mention Eric All a little bit just because he is more of an inline option. 61% of his pass snaps in 2024 came in line, and he caught he caught multiple balls in 7 of his final 8 games that season before tearing his ACL. So he's kind of like a hidden, I don't really think there's much fantasy upside, but I do think worth noting that Eric All can kind of take that inline role, probably over from Drew Sample, who's, essentially a blocker and uses like an H-back a lot for this Bengals team. I think Eric All is someone to just keep an eye on if that role could develop this year.
I like that note. I don't have very many targets on him just from a health perspective, but I did see some positive. I did this projection for the Bengals like pretty early in my process, and I've seen some positive stuff on him since then. So I was just tweaking that a little bit. But the one note I have on the Bengals tight ends always is, to your point, Gesicki plays a little bit of a different role, but they've had multiple, like the whole heavy tight end formations thing that we're seeing. The Bengals have been doing this for like 3-4 years. I think I talked about it on the last couple of years of this podcast, but they had Gesicki had 83 targets in 2024 because T. Higgins missed a little bit more time, but they still had 3 other tight ends over 20 targets that year. Last year, Gesicki had 42. Fant was right behind him with 41, but they had Drew Sample at 20 targets and Tanner Hudson at 24. So they've had 4 tight ends at 20 plus targets 2 years in a row, which is weird when you actually break. Most people are like, I can't contextualize that at all, which I wouldn't blame you, but it's just a thing that they do. Like, and the routes don't condense massively on any one guy typically, other than Gesicki, when Higgins was out, was seeming to basically take over Higgins' role in 2024. Like you said, he kind of plays wide receiver, so he's the one that I ended up projecting for a little bit more. But like All, Sample, Tanner Hudson, we both have them all projected for at least 15-ish. Or I guess I'm a little lower on All, but some volume to each of those dudes. The tight end 2, 3, 4, like that makes it tough for fantasy for anybody.
Yeah, I'll add on Gesicki. He didn't have a whole lot of routes without T. Higgins last year. We have only 72 routes with Higgins off the field last year. His target per route run was only 13%, which is drastically different than it was in 2024. That is a very small sample. So take that for what it's worth. And then just contextualizing Eric All a little bit more. He did have 4 double-digit target shares in 9 games as a rookie and a 23% target per route run. But the injury was pretty nasty, so I think it's something we're going to have to continue to watch. He re-tore the same ACL that he tore in college, and then they had to do multiple procedures on it because the first ACL repair that he got after the college injury, basically they acknowledged that it was done improperly and it didn't really go very well. He missed all of last year because of multiple ACL procedures that he had to undergo. So I definitely think he can really factor in if healthy, but it's one that we'll have to watch throughout camp. And like Gretch said, these guys have such segmented roles. I don't think even if all plays a good amount that they're going to completely phase out Drew Sample. I think they like his blocking so much. So it's not the most interesting tight end room for fantasy unless T. Higgins misses time, and then maybe you've got Gesicki.
They also drafted Jack Andres in the 7th round, and he's a really good athlete as well, and somebody that I know has his fans. He was at Cal for 2 years and transferred to Texas last year, and he could factor in as a rookie to some degree.
Yeah. All right. On the mention of Jack Entries, that is going to wrap up our AFC North pod today. We appreciate all you guys tuning in with us. Thanks again to Jack and Gretch for all the great insight. Be sure to find them on Twitter at JackMiller02 and at YardsPerGretch. I'm on there at Mark Dank. We'll be back next week breaking down the AFC and NFC East division. So have a great day, everyone. Appreciate you all tuning in. Peace out.